Chapter 1311 King of Destruction 2 This. Chen Liao's eyebrows shot up as an ominous premonition arose in her mind. If she recalled correctly, all that supposed King of Destruction did was destroy a formation. But what Zhongxian had just done was tear down the entire main hall of the branch. Ah! While Chen Liao's expression had turned unnatural, Zhongxian was also scratching his head in incomprehension. Where is the might of the elephants and dragons that we agreed upon? Where is the indomitable strength that will be difficult for me to withstand that you spoke of? Just a single palm, and you were already sent flying. Not to mention, you even crashed through the wall. Is it really fine for you to go that easy on an examinee you are assessing? You! Struggling out of a pile of dust, Elder Su's face was so warped that it almost felt as if he would lose his mind. As an elder invigilating an examination, he had actually been sent flying by the examinee. More importantly, he had even warned the other party to be careful of the formidable might behind his palm. Be careful your head. The one who should be freaking careful is me. This. Elder Su, there are still 2 blows remaining. Actually, I only used a half of my strength in the earlier attack, so. Zhongxian said hesitantly. You only used a half of your strength. Elder Su suddenly wobbled on his feet as he became lightheaded. I held back a little when I executed my palm strike earlier, Zhongxian explained. That was not a lie. He did rein in his strength a little. He would rarely display his full strength in a battle unless he deemed it absolutely necessary to do so. In view of Elder Su's supposed powerful palm strike, he had chosen to face it with his strongest move, Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm, but he had still held back in terms of strength. On top of that, in order to maximize the might of the Heavenly Demon Great Sorrow Palm, the attack should come down a downward trajectory. In order to capitalize on the speed of the unbounded Voyager earlier, he could only execute it with a horizontal trajectory, so its strength was further reduced. Elder Su's lips twitched uncontrollably. Despite only facing half of the young man's strength, he still nearly ended up crippled. If the young man had used his full strength in the previous palm strike, would he have lived to see tomorrow's sun? Are you really sure you are a leaving Aperture Realm primary stage cultivator and not a Saint 7 Dan cultivator? Silence drifted in the air for some time, and unable to endure the suspense, Zhongxian spoke up once more. Elder Su, if you find that I'm still lacking, I'll put in my full strength for the 2 remaining moves. Cough cough. It's enough. There's no need for you to face my remaining 2 moves. I believe that you wield strength comparable to a Grand Dominion Realm primary stage cultivator. Elder Su quickly waved his hand. As a formation master, his strength would not be on par with master teachers. Nevertheless, even when suppressing his cultivation, he would still be far stronger than most Grand Dominion Realm cultivators. Yet, despite his strength, he had been sent flying with a single palm strike from the young man. With that alone, there was no need for him to continue with the remaining 2 blows. Thank you, Elder Su. Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. Since his strength had reached the mark, that meant that he was eligible to take the 8-star Formation Master examination. Once he succeeded, he would be able to contact Zhao Ya later in the night. There's no need to stand on ceremony, Elder Su said as he rubbed his 2 trembling hands together. He discreetly whipped out a pill, swallowed it, and released the seal on his cultivation. Only then did he feel his injuries alleviating slightly. After which, he glanced at the massive crack in the middle of the hall, and his mouth twitched slightly. Just as he was about to find someone to repair it, flurried footsteps sounded, and an elder abruptly barged into the room. Old Su, you were right. This time, with the whole lot of us staring at him, that fellow didn't dare cause damage anymore, and is currently challenging the examination obediently. Do you want to take a look as well? It's not a common sight to see him so calm. The elder exclaimed in agitation. Catcher, catcher. Before the elder could finish speaking, the crack on the wall suddenly began advancing once more, crawling over the entire ceiling. It seemed that the elder barging into the room and his loud voice had destabilized the condition in the room. Hualala. Dust began fluttering to the ground. The elder who had just entered the room finally noticed that something was amiss, and lifting his head to look at the ceiling, he shrieked in shock, "Ah, what's that?" That shriek happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Unable to endure it any longer, the room began to shake intensely. Boom! The entire room came crashing down. Rocks, dust, and everything that was in the ceiling collapsed to the ground. Zhongxian and the others hurriedly drove their zhenqi to fend off the falling rubble, and only then were they spared from the calamity. When everything finally settled down, Elder Su took a look at the complete wreckage around him, and he nearly burst into tears. It should have been a simple test to assess the lad's strength, resolved with 3 simple blows. How did it come to this? Admittedly, the hall had not been built with durability in mind. Nevertheless, as a work of celestial designers, its resilience was not to be underestimated. For several centuries, he had lived here with nary a problem, and even after the previous visits of the King of Destruction, the hall had managed to remain standing. Yet, just by crossing palms with this fellow, the hall had been reduced to such a state. The more he thought about it, the more stifled Elder Su felt. Eventually, he could not help but direct an accusatory gaze at the standing young man not too far away. Upon catching sight of the daggers in Elder Su's eyes, Zhongxian's hands instinctively shot up and pointed to the elder who had just entered, and he exclaimed in an innocent and indignant voice, "I wasn't the one who destroyed the hall, he did. It has nothing to do with me, Elder Su." The elder who had just entered. Chen Liao. A moment later, the elder swept away a brick on his head and the debris on his shoulders before turning to Elder Su with a look of bewilderment. "Old Su, this is just what's going on. It's nothing much. I was in the midst of assessing Zhongshi's strength when in a moment of carelessness." Hearing the elder's question, Elder Su's face immediately flushed red. Eventually, he still found himself unable to speak of the exact reason. He was simply too embarrassed to speak of that matter. Even though he did lower his cultivation to Grand Dominion Realm Primary Stage, the opponent he faced was only at leaving Aperture Realm Primary Stage. Furthermore, not only was he sent flying, the impact of his crash even caused the entire hall to collapse. How could he possibly admit to a matter like that before his old acquaintance? Did he not want his pride anymore? If he really came clean, that blabbermouth would surely spread it far and wide, and it would be a matter of hours before every soul in the sanctum of sages knew of his humiliation. In a moment of carelessness, the elder scratched his head in confusion, and dust rained down from his hair. "All right, there's no point talking about this matter anymore. Zhongshi over here intends to take the 8-star examination, so take him to the steps of formations." Fearing that his old friend would continue pursuing the matter, Elder Su anxiously changed the topic at hand. "He wants to take the 8-star examination too? Very well, follow me." Nodding, the elder began leading Zhongxian away. Yuan Zhongxian and Chen Liao quickly followed him. Elder Su hesitated for a moment, but eventually, his gut feeling told him that it might not be safe to leave Zhongxian alone, so he decided to follow along as well. After leaving the rubble, they walked for some time before a staircase came into view. This staircase was extremely bizarre. There was nothing above or below supporting it, and it simply floated off the ground, ascending straight into the sky, as if leading to a heavenly palace of some sort. "What's this?" Zhongxian asked curiously. He could tell that there were many formations inscribed on each of the steps of the staircase and in the surroundings in order to allow them to float. Nevertheless, it was still a rather impressive feat. "This is what we call the steps of formations, and this is where we conduct the Formation Master Examination," the elder explained with a chuckle. "Steps of formations? Yuan. Every single step here contains a unique formation, be it illusory formation, slaughter formation, beguilement formation, and many others. Some of them even require one to set up a formation in order to decipher it. All in all, there are 90 steps here, and every 10 steps is equivalent to the increment of a star in rank," the elder explained. "As long as you can reach the 80th floor, that will mean that you have cleared the 8-star Formation Master Examination." Zhongxian nodded in realization. In a sense, this was similar to the sea of formations that he had encountered previously. Basically speaking, the Formation Master had to display their prowess through overcoming all sorts of formations that stood in their way in order to clear the examination. Once the examinee reached a certain mark, that would signify that they had cleared the examination. Also, depending on where the examinee had stopped, that could also be used to determine how far had their mastery of formations had reached. For example, reaching the 75th step would mean that they had achieved the proficiency equivalent to a 7-star high-tier formation master. Of course, this examination was clearly at a different level to the sea of formations. Some of the formations even required one to set up a formation in order to clear. It would be highly testing on one's state of mind, creativity, and knowledge of formations. Even for Zhongxian, this examination could pose quite a bit of a challenge. While the both of them were still chatting, Chen Liao could not help but ask, "Elders, may I ask if those standing on the steps are all challenging the examination too?" Taking another look, Zhongxian realized that there was a total of 5 people standing on the staircase. These students did not continue heading up. Instead, each of them was standing atop a step. Their eyes were tightly shut, almost as if they were in a daze or in the midst of deep contemplation. Or maybe, they were already consumed by the formation, unable to struggle free. Indeed, they are currently challenging the formation, too. Elder Su nodded. 2 are taking the 5-star and 7-star examinations, and 1 is taking the 8-star examination. Zhongxian took a closer look and noted that 2 of the students were standing on steps in the 40s, 2 on steps in the 60s, and 1 on steps in the 70s. After a moment, Zhongxian asked curiously, "The King of Destruction you spoke of earlier must be the highest student up there, right?" He had heard from the elder who barged in earlier that the King of Destruction had not completed his examination yet. Given so, it would make sense for the latter to still be on top. Previously, Elder Su had said that the King of Destruction was intending to take the 8-star formation master examination as well, just like him, so by deduction, he would be the one in the 70s. Elder Su harumphed in displeasure. Indeed, that's him. Who in the world would like to be around someone who could cause massive devastation all of a sudden? Intrigued, Zhongxian took a closer look at the King of Destruction and noted that he was a young man who seemed to be in his 30s. His figure looked a little slim and slender, and he was dressed in a light grey robe. As the other party's back was facing him, he was unable to make out his facial features, but he could vaguely feel a cold and lofty aura emanating from him. Zhongxian did a swift calculation before remarking with a smile, "He seems to be on the 79th step. I wonder if he will be able to take the final step forward." In this moment, all the steps suddenly began shaking wildly, as if a rampaging beast had crashed heavily onto it. "The hell, the King of Destruction is attempting to destroy our steps of formations. Hurry up and stop him," an anxious voice yelled. Shortly after hearing those words, Zhongxian suddenly realized that there were a couple more elders sitting by the staircase, and they were dressed similarly to Elder Su. Most likely, they were the other elders dispatched to keep the King of Destruction in check. The elder who had shouted earlier had an anxious look on his face, and as he spoke, he quickly gathered Junchi in his palm and pumped it into the staircase before him, seemingly attempting to stabilize the steps of formations. Unfortunately, there were simply too many formations on the steps. As powerful as that formation was, he was not strong enough to stabilize the entire structure by himself. "What are you all waiting for? Hurry up and help out." In this moment, Elder Su could not pay attention to Zhongxian any longer. He quickly flew forth and pumped his Junchi into the steps of formations as well. With 6 powerful formation masters making a move simultaneously, the staircase's shaking did lessen. However, in this moment, the young man on the 79th step suddenly opened his eyes and lifted his leg. Just as he was about to step on the 80th step, the steps beneath his feet finally reached their limits. Hong long. With a resounding explosion, everything collapsed. Countless formations flew across the air, causing the spiritual energy in the surroundings to fall into chaos. "This." Zhongxian gulped subconsciously. "He really is the King of Destruction." Chapter 13:12 It's really hard to obtain one's emblems through application. The steps were eroding and the formations were collapsing. Before the other examinees could process what was going on, they suddenly felt the ground beneath them vanishing, and putong. All of them fell to the ground, creating huge depressions beneath them. Opening their eyes, they scanned their surroundings with a dazed look, unsure of what was going on. "We are only here to take the Formation Master examination. Can anyone tell us what in the world is going on?" King of Destruction, You must compensate our steps of formations. If you can't fix it well, don't even dream of leaving. You bastard, I'll kill you. Elder Sue, don't get reckless. You won't be able to defeat him. Elder Sue and the others felt burning rage gushing into their minds, and they immediately sealed the surrounding space as they stared at the young man in the sky with hatred burning in their eyes. The steps of formations had been in the sanctum of sages since time immemorial. Countless geniuses had been assessed by it, but never had any problem cropped up before. Yet, it was reduced to rubble as soon as that fellow came. How could they possibly not be burning with rage? The King of Destruction also didn't seem to know what was going on either. With a dazed look on his face, he looked down at the collapsed staircase beneath him, as if still trying to figure out what had just happened. I really didn't do it on purpose. Could it be that the quality of the steps of formations is made out of inferior materials? The King of Destruction asked with a helpless shrug. Inferior, your sister? Unable to take it any longer, Elder Sue roared in anger. You said that it was made out of inferior materials? So many people had challenged it, but it was still able to remain standing across all those years. Yet, as soon as you came, it ended up collapsing. How can you have the cheek to say it's made out of inferior materials? Su Bing, I have warned you before. Don't you dare insult my sister. Upon hearing the cursing, the King of Destruction's face immediately darkened as a threatening glint emerged in his narrowed eyes. A hint of killing intent emanated from him. Hong Long. In the blink of an eye, the figure in the sky had already appeared right before Elder Sue. Alarmed, Elder Sue raised his hand to receive the King of Destruction's attack in a fluster, but before he could make it in time, he already felt a sharp pain in his chest. A foot had struck him squarely. Pang! While spurting blood in midair, he crashed right into a wall not too far away and created yet another massive hole in his wake. That fellow is strong. Zhong Xian's lower jaw fell in astonishment. Elder Sue's true strength was at Saint Seven Dan at the very minimum, and yet, he was still unable to withstand a single strike from the King of Destruction. It seemed like despite the young age of the King of Destruction, the strength that he wielded was not to be underestimated. What was particularly impressive was the speed he traversed from the sky to Elder Sue at. It was as if he had stepped right through space, achieving a speed that was on par with his unbounded Voyager. Calm down, calm down. Su Bing didn't do it intentionally. It's just out of a moment of rage that he misspoke. Seeing that one of their companions had been sent flying with a kick, the other elders glanced at one another in shock for a moment before hurriedly rushing up to placate the King of Destruction, fearing that the young man would fly into a rage once more. I told you before. Criticize me if you want, but never ever insult my sister. If I were to hear a single word regarding my sister coming out from your mouth, the young man said as he glared coldly at the elders standing before him. Facing the young man's menacing gaze, the lips of the elders twitched in fear. Why yes. Old Sue, what are you waiting for? Get over here and apologize. One of them turned around and bellowed. Cough cough. Climbing up from the rubble with difficulty, Elder Sue spurted a mouthful of blood upon hearing those words. With a tearfully indignant expression, he walked forward, clasped his fist, and said, I apologize for my previous faux pas, and I seek your forgiveness for the matter. To be sent into the wall twice in a single day. What the heck is this? Hearing Elder Sue's apology, the coldness on the King of Destruction's face finally alleviated, and he nodded in satisfaction. That's more like it. You better take note of it in the future, all right? Ah. Zhong Xian and Chen Liao glanced at one another in utter shock. No words could describe what they were feeling at this moment. Too arrogant. That fellow had turned the examination ground to rubble, and yet, when one of the elders reprimanded him for the matter, he actually just rushed forward to beat him up. It was in this moment that a seed of doubt was planted in Zhong Xian's mind. Had I actually been too amiable in the past? Admittedly, he did cause quite a bit of destruction in the past, but he would always try to make up with it by offering all kinds of compensation, sometimes even offering to repair it back to perfection. On the other hand, the young man in front of him was completely unreasonable, not even bothering to apologize for what he had done. So what if I destroyed it? Just try criticizing me, and I'll make you crawl all over the ground, searching for your fallen teeth. All right. There's no need to give me a gift or anything of that sort as an apology. I am a rather casual person, and I don't like to cause excessive trouble either." The King of Destruction waved his hand leisurely. Those words left the elders of the Formation Master Guild branch nearly collapsing to the ground. "We are only apologizing to you. Who in the world is going to give you a gift? Furthermore, casual? Don't like to cause excessive trouble? At the rate you are going, even killing all of us here would be a trivial matter to you, right? Is that how it's supposed to go?" Overwhelmed with shock, this was the only thing that was on Zhongxian's mind at this moment. It was no wonder why the other party was called the King of Destruction. He was indeed vicious. Compared to the other party, he was truly lacking. There was really no ground for comparison between the both of them. Regarding the steps of formations, with faces reddened in indignation, Elder Su and the others couldn't stand it any longer, and they pointed to the rubble on the ground. "Don't bother with words of apology or that sort anymore. What's more important right now is that I haven't finished my 8-star Formation Master examination yet. You all should hurry up and find a way to repair it first." The King of Destruction interjected. The crowd was stifled speechless by those words. Even Zhongxian was left in a state of shock. Was it really fine for one to be that shameless? It was one thing not to offer any compensation after destroying the other party's property, but to pummel the other party up and even demand it to be fixed as soon as possible. Really, did that fellow have no sense of shame? It seems like I'm still thin-skinned as compared to him. Zhongxian thought in embarrassment. All those who had chased after me due to the destruction I have caused, did you see that? That's the real King of Destruction standing right there. What I did can only be considered as a small disturbance at the very most, not even worth a mention. The Steps of Formations was constructed by 8 9-star Formation Masters dispatched by the headquarters, and they took 3 months in total before they finished building it. Our strength isn't sufficient to repair it, Elder Su said with a reddened face. 9-star Formation Masters were basically capable of creating any formations beneath grade 9 in an instant. However, to compress a formation into the size of a single step, and have it trigger immediately as soon as someone came into contact with it so as to assess him, that was definitely no easy task. Even Formation Masters of their rank would need to take a fair bit of time before they could pull off something like that. You aren't able to repair it. But I need to clear the Formation Master examination as soon as possible. I don't have much time to waste. The King of Destruction frowned in anger. Actually, there's no need for you to worry. We have all seen that the circumstances of the examination earlier, and you have already reached the 79th step, just a step away from reaching the 80th. That is sufficient to show that your prowess is already on par with 8-star Formation Masters. We can help you apply for an 8-star emblem straight so that you don't have to take the examination anymore. At this point, Elder Su didn't even want to argue with the King of Destruction anymore. All he wanted to do was to send the other party away as quickly as possible. It was already bad enough for it to be destroyed once. If they were to allow that fellow to challenge it once again after it was repaired, who knew what would happen the next time around? Since that was the case, they might as well just clear the fellow and send him on his way. In any case, given the previous circumstances, it was apparent that he was about to reach the 80th step when the Steps of Formations abruptly collapsed. Thus, in a sense, they weren't compromising on the examination either. You want to apply for an 8-star emblem for me? The King of Destruction was taken aback. How can that do? I always seek to clear my examinations with my own ability. Such shortcuts just aren't for me. Besides, formations have always been my greatest weakness, and since I'm already taking the examination, I should use it as an opportunity to temper my skills too. I don't need you to apply the emblem for me. Elder Su and the others clawed at their hair. Are you done yet? We have already admitted defeat, even offering to give the emblem right into your hands, so why are you still rejecting it? Will you only be content after you have driven all of us mad? Elder Su, may I interject for a bit? Seeing how the atmosphere had turned awkward, Zhongxian couldn't help but step forward to interject. Zhongshe, feel free to speak. Elder Su clasped his fist. Zhongxian had also destroyed the hall earlier on, but compared to the King of Destruction, The other party still felt pure like an innocent, white lily. Furthermore, after what the King of Destruction had done, the contrast between the both of them made him feel that Zhongxian's character was actually not too bad. Is it impossible to take the examination now that the steps of formations have collapsed? Zhongxian asked. Actually, this was what he was more concerned about. He needed to clear the 8-star formation master examination as soon as possible so that he could access the grade 8 formation books. This way, he would finally be able to meet the disciple that he hadn't met for a very long time. Would the collapse of the steps of formations mean that his plans were going to fall through? A conflicted look surfaced on Elder Su's face. Actually, it's not that there's no other way to conduct the examination, but the time required might be a little longer. Oh, what's the other way? Zhongxian's eyes lit up. We can make an application to the headquarters right now and have them send over a brand new formation blueprint over. The examinee will start studying it on the spot and attempt to set it up. As long as the examinee succeeds, and the tier of the formation meets the mark, he would be considered to have cleared the examination. Elder Su paused for a moment before saying, in truth, this was the most direct manner to assess a formation master. However, having a 7-star pinnacle formation master set up a grade 8 formation would require at least several months of effort. Due to how exhausting and lengthy the examination was, as well as the great number of examinees that challenged the formation master examination each year, such an ineffective method had been gradually eliminated with time. In order for a formation to display its true prowess, one would have to harmonize it together with the surrounding environment, and considering the complexity of a grade 8 formation, it would indeed be far more time-consuming. Zhongxian nodded. However, I'm willing to undergo this examination. It was true that most 7-star formation masters would take a very long time to set up a basic grade 8 formation, but Zhongxian was different. With just a sweep of his eye of insight, he would be able to determine the ideal locations where he should plant the formation flags at. Even if that didn't work, he still had the Library of Heaven's Path to fall back on. As such, setting up a basic grade 8 formation could be said to be a walk in the park for him. Since there's such a method as well, I want to take the examination too. Before Elder Su could reply to Zhongxian's remark, the King of Destruction had already spoken up once more. You wish to take the examination too? Hearing that the King of Destruction was going to continue with the examination, everyone shuddered in fear. That's right, the King of Destruction nodded affirmatively. Seeing the frightened look on the faces of the elders, Zhongxian couldn't help but step in. This friend over here. Actually, since Elder Su and the others are going to apply for an emblem for you, there's really no need for you to take the examination anymore. Why do you want to go through so much trouble? Since that fellow could already obtain the 8-star formation master emblem, why in the world was he being so troublesome here? Having an emblem applied for one is like being taken pity upon. I don't need anyone's pity, the King of Destruction harumphed coldly. Since the Formation Master Guild is willing to give the emblem out to you, it shows that they have already acknowledged you. Since that's the case, how can that be considered as pity? At this point, Zhongxian flicked his wrist and took out his emblem. Look, this formation emblem I have over here was applied for me by Guild Leader Han of the Qingyuan Empire Formation Master Guild. I didn't even attend the examination. The King of Destruction frowned in dilemma. It should be hard to get an emblem applied for one, right? To be able to have one's emblem directly applied for one was definitely no easy task. If the other party was able to get the head of a Formation Master Guild to do it for him, could it mean that the other party was an incredible genius as well, just like him? You're right. It's really, really hard to obtain one's emblem through application. After all, how often do you see a person obtaining his emblem through application? With a deep sigh, Zhongxian flicked his wrist, and a whole string of emblems appeared before him. But well, what can I say? My 7-star demonic tunist emblem applied. 7-star apothecary emblem applied. 7-star painter emblem applied. 7-star terpsichore emblem applied. 7-star appraiser emblem applied. 7-star physician emblem applied. King of Destruction. The Elders. Chen Liao. I know this might sound awkward because I usually translate it to your head, but this is actually the original version of it. Chapter 13:13 Your sister, cough cough. Zhongshu, it's fine. You can keep your stuff. Clutching his heart, Elder Su couldn't bring himself to look at them. What the heck was with all of them? In a sense, having one's emblem applied for one was similar to being given a direct admission into branded schools. Typically speaking, it was extremely difficult to encounter something like that, almost nigh impossible. Yet, the fellow before him actually took out a whole pile of emblems and they were all freaking applied for. More importantly, he even had the cheek to say that it was really, really difficult to obtain emblems by application. Is this really how really, really difficult is to you? Why does it seem like you are intentionally bragging about it to us instead? You obtain all of these through application? The eyes of the King of Destruction widened as his breathing hastened. Just how much destruction did you cause to receive such treatment? He had to visit this branch thrice and destroy the steps of formations before Elder Su offered to apply for the emblem in his stead. Could he have possibly found a comrade in the same path? Destruction? Of course not. It's not like I'm into destroying stuff or anything. Zhongxian hurriedly waved his hand in denial. I had all of these applied for me through my personal charisma. Personal charisma? Mph, I don't believe you. If you weren't destroying any of their stuff, why would they go through so much trouble to specially make an application for your emblem? Alright then, why don't you tell me how you managed to receive your 7-star formation master emblem then? Back then, they encountered a grade 8 seal which they were unable to decipher. I managed to open up a hole in the formation, and it's through that which I earned the approval of the Qingyuan Empire Formation Master Guild. Thinking back, he met guild leader Han back at the entrance to the Qiuwu Palace. He was attempting to create an opening in a seal containing the rampaging energy in the volcano, and after a series of misunderstandings, he eventually managed to win guild leader Han over through his capabilities. Open up a hole in a formation? How is that any different from destroying? The King of Destruction clicked his tongue in displeasure. What about your 7-star apothecary emblem then? I obtained that through rendering the head of the Qingyuan Empire Apothecary Guild speechless during a pill debate. The spectacle was truly amazing then. The entire apothecary school of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy ended up. It was at this moment that Zhongxian realized he had misspoken, but with everyone's eyes staring intently on him, he had no choice but to continue on. Being torn down. The lips of the King of Destruction curled up into a smirk. Aha, I knew it. What about your 7-star appraiser emblem? While appraising a painting, I scraped off a layer of it and exposed a problem in it. Zhongxian's voice gradually grew more and more diffident. Your 7-star demonic tunist emblem? I ended up knocking out all of the divine cranes in charge of the examination, and as there weren't sufficient cranes to conduct the examination anymore, school head Jiang ended up specially applying for the 7-star emblem for me. Thinking back on those incidents, cold sweat started to rain down Zhongxian's back. True, he didn't destroy buildings frenziedly like what the King of Destruction did. But it honestly felt like his actions were not any better though. All along, he had viewed himself to be a good person, but the more he spoke, the more he felt that he was the villain instead. And you still refuse to call that destruction? The King of Destruction stared at Zhongxian with a smug look. Earlier, I seem to have heard some explosion sound from the direction where you all came from earlier. Did something happen? While testing out my strength, I accidentally tore down the main hall. Zhongxian replied awkwardly. The King of Destruction clicked his tongue. Is this the personal charisma you speak of? Zhongxian was rendered speechless. He was still confident in himself a moment ago, thinking that it was how outstanding he was that he managed to get others to apply for his emblems. But looking back now, could they have done so out of fear to placate him, so as to prevent him from causing any more damage? But it was not like he did all of that intentionally. Anxious, Zhongxian turned to Elder Su and the others in hope of finding some support from them, only to see their bodies trembling uncontrollably and their faces livid in fear. It was already bad enough for a King of Destruction to barge into their home. Just what in the world did they do so wrong for the heavens to send 2 homewreckers into their branch? All they wished for was a life of peace. Was this simple wish of theirs really that difficult to fulfill? Seeing all of the fearful looks directed at him, Zhongxian could only lower his head in resignation. Realizing that it was impossible for him to salvage his reputation anymore, he quickly changed the topic. Elder Su, I think you should hurry up and make the application with the headquarter. I intend to take the examination to obtain the 8-star formation master emblem. Really, all he wanted to do here was to take the examination. He had no intention of causing any trouble at all. No wonder why the King of Destruction was unwilling to have his emblems applied for him. At this point, it seemed almost as if the occupation guilds would only specially apply emblems in order to placate troublemakers. I'll take the examination together with him, the King of Destruction interjected. Elder Su looked at the two of them for a moment before slowly nodding. Then, he turned around and left the room. An examination to set up formation was troublesome, but it shouldn't be possible to cause too much damage through that. This course of action was at least acceptable to him. Not too long later, Elder Su returned. This is the elementary grade 8 formation which I have just applied for from the headquarters. I'll give you 3 days to study it, and as long as you can successfully construct it within 3 months, I'll consider it as your pass. After which, he flicked his hand, and a formation blueprint appeared before the duo. The blueprint was extremely complex, making it extremely hard to harmonize it with the surrounding environment. Even though it was only an elementary grade 8 formation, it was at least several times more intricate than that of a 7-star pinnacle formation. However, it's still a lot easier to set up than the supporting formation Chen Liao showed me. After taking a look, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Even though he was a 7-star formation master, his understanding of formations was already on par with most 8-star primary formation masters. While he would have trouble constructing some of the more profound grade 8 formations, for elementary ones like this, it was still no trouble at all. Haha, I am known to be one of the fastest readers in my clan. It seems like I'm going to complete it faster than you. While Zhong Xian was still harboring such thoughts in mind, he suddenly heard the hearty laughter of the King of Destruction beside him. You are a fast reader. Hearing those words, Zhong Xian turned a glance over. Indeed. Despite the complexity of this formation, I'm confident that I would be able to fully comprehend it within half a day, the King of Destruction declared proudly. For a young man in his 30s to wield strength which even Elder Su was no match against, there was no doubt that the King of Destruction was a person of great talent, possessing skills that surpassed most ordinary men. What about you? After speaking his piece confidently, the King of Destruction turned to look at Zhong Xian intently. There was a bright smile of his face, but the look of competitiveness in his eyes was impossible to miss. It wasn't rare for him to find a fellow avid destroyer, and it was even more coincidental that the both of them were challenging the 8-star formation master examination at the same time. Considering the various similarities between the both of them, it was inevitable for him to compare himself against Zhong Xian, wanting to see who would be the superior one. You are asking me? Zhong Xian was slightly surprised by that abrupt question. He hesitated for a moment, and instead of answering the question straight, he turned to Elder Su and asked, Are there formation flags for grade 8 formations here? Of course, we have them all prepared. Elder Su wasn't sure why Zhong Xian would suddenly ask such a question, but he still flicked his wrist, and a huge pile of grade 8 formation flags appeared on the ground. Thank you. With a smile, Zhong Xian waved his hand, and all of the formation flags immediately flew into the air. Then, he snapped his fingers. Voila! The several hundred flags immediately flew into the surroundings, plunging themselves into the ground all around the room. What is he up to? Seeing Zhong Xian tossing the formation flags all of a sudden, everyone was startled. They had no idea what he was up to. On the other hand, paying no heed to the crowd's shock, Zhong Xian took a few steps back and stomped his feet. Wang! With a buzzing sound, a formation came into life. Mist immediately crept into the room, hindering the sight of all those who stood within. Grade 8 formation activated. I'm done. Zhong Xian clapped his hands to rid the dust on them. I have finished setting up the grade 8 formation. The King of Destruction. Elder Su and the others. Chen Liao. Cough cough. It took a very long time before Elder Su and the others were able to recover from their shock. The various elders quickly checked the various aspects of the formation for the first time, the second time, and the third time, but they were unable to find any single problem with it at all. In the end, they could only give a nod of approval. There's no problem with the formation Zhongshe has set up. I hereby declare that Zhongshe, has cleared the 8-star formation master examination. The King of Destruction felt so stifled on the inside that he could hardly breathe. To be honest, he was intending to compete with Zhongshe and show off a bit before him, but in the end, he only ended up having his own face slapped instead. He wasn't even done reading through the content in the formation, but the other party was already done setting up the formation. Wasn't this a little too fast? Forget it, Elder Su. I don't want to take the examination anymore. Help me apply for my 8-star formation master emblem instead. The King of Destruction waved his hand and harumphed in displeasure. This. All right then, Elder Su nodded. This was what he had offered the other party from the start anyway. Besides, considering that it was the King of Destruction they were dealing with, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Thank you. The King of Destruction nodded. He took a glance at the destroyed steps of formations and said, I'll have my men to compensate the damages here, and I'll find someone to have the steps of formations repaired back to its original state as soon as possible too. We'll be counting on you then. Hearing those words, Elder Su and the others visibly heaved a sigh of relief. On the other hand, Zhongshe nodded inconspicuously in approval as well. All this while, he had thought that the King of Destruction was an extremely unreasonable person, causing damage here and there without taking responsibility for his actions. But from the looks of it now, that wasn't exactly the case. While his actions did inconvenience others, he did make reparations for them afterward, so his actions were still barely acceptable. There's no need to stand on ceremony, the King of Destruction replied before turning over. Your name is Zhongshe? That's right. Zhongshe nodded. You are a freshman who just came in this year? Otherwise, there's no way I wouldn't have heard of your name, the King of Destruction asked with uplifted eyebrows. The ability to set up grade 8 formation instantaneously was, without a doubt, an extremely powerful capability. If there had been such a figure in the Sanctum of Sages before, he would have surely heard of him before. That's right. Not bad. Talented and skilled, yet humble and low profile, just like me. I like you. The King of Destruction nodded in satisfaction. You're too kind. Zhongshe replied with a polite smile. Considering the King of Destruction's strength, he was bound to be from an extraordinary background. Being on good terms with a person like the King of Destruction was definitely a good thing for him. I'll be leaving now. If you intend to challenge the examinations of any other occupations in the future, feel free to call me along. I have connections in many of them, so they would usually give me some leeway, the King of Destruction said. Zhongshe quickly thanked the other party, after which, the King of Destruction began making his way out. Watching at the departing back, Zhongshe turned to Elder Su and the others with a doubtful look and asked telepathically, Elder Su, may I know which clan is the King of Destruction from? It was apparent that Elder Su and the others had been relatively docile before the King of Destruction. While it was true that the King of Destruction possessed great strength, Elder Su and the others should have connections in the Sanctum of Sages too, and they were backed by the Formation Master Guild as well, so they shouldn't have been any need for them to treat the other party so respectfully. In other words, the King of Destruction must have a powerful background which even Elder Su and the others were fearful of. Otherwise, given his track record, he would have long been expelled from the Sanctum of Sages. You don't recognize him? Elder Su and the others were speechless. After all that had been said and done, you actually don't know who the King of Destruction is? Zhongshe replied with a nod. He's from the Luo clan, Luo Shenqing. Elder Su replied. Luo clan, as in the Sage clan? Zhongshe was taken aback. It just happened that he was looking for members of the Luo clan, but who could have thought that the young man before him would actually be one of them? To wield such strength at his age, he should possess considerable standing in the Luo clan, right? With this thought in mind, Zhongshe asked anxiously, may I know what is Luo Xuanqing's identity in the Luo clan? His identity. Seeing that Zhongshe really didn't know a thing at all, a helpless look surfaced on Elder Su's face. He's the 6th son of the head of the Luo clan. If you still don't know who he is, you should have heard of the famed little princess of the Luo clan, right? The little princess is his younger sister. He is Ruoxin's elder brother? So, my brother-in-law? Zhong Xian froze in the spot. In the next moment, he quickly turned around, and upon seeing that King of Destruction Luo Shenqing hadn't gotten far, he immediately shouted out, "Broth! Luo Shenqing, brother Luo!" Hearing that someone was shouting for him, Luo Shenqing turned around with a frown. Upon seeing that the other party had turned around, Zhong Xian couldn't help but tremble in agitation at the thought that he would be able to learn about Luo Ruoxin's affairs very soon. He began speaking, "Your sister. You sister." But before Zhong Xian could finish his words, a furious bellow boomed across the air. Following which, Luo Shenqing abruptly appeared before him, and a fist crashed right into his face. Pang! Zhong Xian was sent flying away, and he struck the wall behind him head first. Boom! Voila! The entire building had already been in a fragile state after Elder Su's crash, and with Zhong Xian crashing into it now too, everything around them began collapsing. Chapter 13-14 Reunion. In view that this is your first offense, I'll let you off this time. However, if you dare speak another word about my sister, don't blame me for taking your life. After sending Zhong Xian flying, Luo Shenqing harumphed coldly and left. In the blink of an eye, he had already vanished from the spot. Rubbing his head, Zhong Xian quickly climbed up from the rubble. He wanted to stop Luo Shenqing from leaving, but it was already too late. Thus, he could only stare helplessly at the entrance of the branch. All I wanted to ask is some news on Ruoxin. I have no intentions of scolding you or your sister. Do you need to get that agitated? Taking a deep breath, Zhong Xian drove his Heaven's Path Shenqi to recover from his wounds. He couldn't help but feel a little dispirited. Despite all the breakthroughs he had made recently, he was still too weak. Earlier, the other party had appeared before him in an instant, such that he didn't even have time to react before his body was sealed in place, preventing him from even speaking a single word. If only he was a little stronger, he wouldn't have been in such a passive position, subdued by the other party within a single strike. It was fortunate that the other party had gone easy on him, or else that encounter could have very well claimed his life. Still, this was a very bad first meeting. To think that his future brother-in-law would send him flying in a single punch. Zhong Xian was helpless for a moment before he raked together his determination, and his eyes turned resolute once more. I really should focus on raising my cultivation as soon as possible. If I can't even defeat my brother-in-law, how can I stand against the Zhong clan and Luo clan and negotiate with them for Luo Ruoxin's marriage in hand? This brother-in-law of his was one of the younger generations in the Luo clan, but even so, the strength that he wielded was already so frightening. Considering that Zhong clan was famed to be the #1 clan in the master-teacher continent, they were bound to be even more powerful. At the very least, he would have to unseal the Sanctum Head token by the 3rd month of next year in order to be able to hold a candle to them. Only so would he be able to wield a standing and power that the Zhong clan and Luo clan would have to think twice before shrugging him off. "Zhongshe, you." Just as Zhong Xian was deep in thoughts, a voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Turning his head over, he saw Chen Liao looking at him with a deeply worried look. "Is your head all right?" The young man had a punch smashed into his head by the King of Destruction, and ever since then, he had been in a very long daze. It was no wonder why she would get worried. "I'm fine." Zhong Xian shook his head before turning to the other elders not too far away. "Elders, since I have become an 8-star formation master, is it possible for me to access the 8-star formation master books now? If it isn't too much to ask, may I ask you to bring me there?" In any case, there was no way for him to rush his strength. In order to build a strong foundation, he would have to slowly advance a step at a time. Since he had successfully cleared the Formation Master examination, it would be better for him to bring his mastery of his occupation up to par first before deciding on anything else. "You want to visit our library? Follow me." Elder Su nodded. "Fairy Liao, I think it would be better for you to return first. After I'm done finding a way to swiftly set up the supporting formation, I'll head over to look for you," Zhong Xian said with a smile. "Very well." Chen Liao nodded before she turned around and left. Following behind Elder Su, Zhong Xian walked through quite a few corridors before he finally arrived before a room with tall doors. "Here is our library. As we are still in the midst of processing your emblem, I'll give you this one-time use token instead. With it in hand, you'll be able to enter the area and browse through any books you want. Elder Su said. He had no idea why the young man would suddenly ask to read at this moment, but showing a desire to learn was always a good matter. Thank you. After taking the token, Zhongxian began making his way in. Just like the libraries of most other guilds, it had many shelves, each of them densely filled with books. In terms of quantity and variety of books, it couldn't hold a candle to the Master-Teacher Pavilion, but when it came to the depth of knowledge in formations, there were definitely no other libraries that could compete with it. Zhongxian began sweeping through the shelves with a swift glance of his eyes. In less than an hour, he had already collected every single book in the room into his Library of Heaven's Path. Compile. Zhongxian willed, and the Library of Heaven's Path jolted. A book appeared before him. With a tap on the book, the knowledge that was concealed within it immediately flowed into his consciousness. Time to start studying. Zhongxian quickly scanned the area for a quiet spot before sitting down and fully immersing himself in his study. It was a steep learning curve from grade 7 formations to grade 8 formations, especially when it came to teleportation formations. The enhanced complexity was already a tough nut to crack, but more than that, one would have to possess a firm grasp over spatial laws in order to set them up. Without that, it would be impossible to set it up even if one were to comprehend the full complexity of the grade 8 formation. 4 hours later, Zhongxian stood up while rubbing his glabella. It's really getting more and more difficult. In the past, I would take 2 hours or so to finish browsing through any of the Heaven's Path books, but this time, I actually took 2 times of that. Zhongxian sighed deeply. The fact that he took 4 hours to finish studying the 8-star Heaven's Path formation art fully reflected how difficult it was. If not for his excellent state of mind, it was questionable whether he could have lasted that long. Shaking his head, Zhongxian decided not to think too much into it. He quickly ran through the knowledge he had just assimilated, and he couldn't help but be astonished by how profound the art was. As expected of the 8-star Heaven's Path formation art, the knowledge contained within really brought his understanding of formations to a far higher level, opening a new world before him. In terms of depth of knowledge regarding formations, he was already comparable to an 8-star pinnacle formation master. However, due to his cultivation still only being at leaving Aperture Realm primary stage, it would still be difficult for him to set up some of the more advanced grade 8 formations. The 4 hours of studying had left him feeling deeply fatigued. The more advanced a formation was, the more complex it would be. This would mean that one would have to make far greater calculations, thus creating a greater burden on one's mind as well. Had Zhongxian not possessed decent talent in formations, it would probably have been impossible for him to finish learning the 8-star Heaven's Path formation art that quickly. I should be able to set up Chen Liao's supporting formation easily now. Even though Zhongxian was exhausted, there was still an excited glint in his eyes. He rested on the spot for a while, and after feeling that his fatigue had vanished and his mind was refreshed, he walked out of the library and headed back to his own accommodation. Not too long later, he was already standing right before his residence. But instead of entering it, he headed for Chen Liao's residence and knocked on the door instead. Enter. Chen Liao's crisp voice sounded from within. Pushing open the door and entering, he saw the young lady standing quietly at the center of the room, her body pulled into a rather peculiar position. This position accentuated her curvaceous features, fully displaying her physical charms. Her acupoints were all opened, and she was drawing in the surrounding spiritual energy into her body swiftly. With just a look, Zhongxian could tell that it was one of the alterations he had made to the yin formula back then. As bizarre as the body posture may seem, it enhanced the rate at which one could absorb spiritual energy at, and on top of that, it also resolved the damage which the yin-yang lake would deal to one's body. If one were to constantly cultivate using this method, it would accentuate one's figure too. Judging from how standard Chen Liao's posture was, it could be seen that she often used this method to cultivate. Zhongshu, you have found a way to set up the supporting formation quickly. Chen Liao slowly halted her cultivation and returned back to a normal standing position before turning to look at Zhongxian with a faint smile. Perhaps too used to maintaining a cold demeanor, she was unable to fully shake off her coldness even when she smiled. However, that only seemed to add another layer to her charm, creating a feeling somewhat reminiscent of the cold moon smiling slightly down upon one. It must be said that Chen Liao was indeed an incredible beauty, on par with even Hu Yaoyao and the others. Otherwise, Zhong Qian wouldn't have specialico me over to please her either. Yuan. Where do you think would be convenient to set up the supporting formation? Zhong Qian replied. To him, it mattered not whether Chen Liao was beautiful or not. What was most important was that he would be able to get in touch with Zhao Ya very soon. That room would do, Chen Liao said. The accommodation which the Sanctum of Sages allocated to the students of the elite division was rather spacious, containing several rooms. They could be used as places to cultivate or welcoming one's guests. The room which Chen Liao was pointing to was a room that was neighboring her courtyard. All right. Zhong Qian quickly entered the room and scanned the area with his eye of insight. A moment later, he turned to Chen Liao and asked, "Do you have grade 8 formation flags with you? Here you go." With a snap of her finger, Chen Liao passed several hundred formation flags over. Go. Zhong Qian bellowed deeply, and the formation flags immediately rose to the sky. They simultaneously shot forth to a different direction in the room, and it took only the blink of an eye for all of them to be in place. After which, Zhong Qian confirmed his position once more before stomping his feet. Wang. The formation was immediately driven into action. After confirming that there was no problem with the formation, Zhong Qian turned to Chen Liao and asked in agitation, "Where's the jade communication token?" Chen Liao flicked her wrist, and a jade token fell lightly onto the very center of the room. The fact that she was able to set up the supporting formation too, even though it would take several months, meant that her comprehension of formations had also reached 8-star as well. Naturally, she was able to easily discern where the core of the formation was, as well as where she should place the communication jade token to best amplify its transmission signals. Wang. As soon as the jade token fell onto the core of the formation shook for a bit. A warm glow rippled through it, as if trying to establish communication with someone far away. Knowing that the young man was eager to meet his student, Chen Liao didn't waste any time on words. She walked up to the communication jade token, and with a few strokes, she sent a message over. Wang. Not too long later, a slight buzzing sound echoed, and the formation shook once more. Following which, a round portal similar to a mirror appeared before his eyes. As the mist slowly cleared, a face so beautiful that it could even freeze one's heart gradually came into appearance. Zhao Wai. Half a year of absence, the young lady in Zhong Qian's memories had grown much more mature. She naturally commanded a disposition of elegant, and her facial features had gotten far more ravishing as well, as if they had been painstakingly carved into perfection. With just one look, one would find oneself unwittingly holding one's breath. She was simply too beautiful. Every single aspect of her seemed to be the embodiment of beauty itself, making it impossible to pick out a single flaw in it. Even when compared to the undisguised Luo Ruoxin, her look still didn't pale in comparison at all. Zhongshe, feel free to speak of anything to our young court chief. I'll be taking my leave first. Knowing that the reunited teacher and student would have much to say to one another, Chen Liao backed out of the room and took her leave. Teacher, is that really you? Are you at the Sanctum of Sages? Shortly after Chen Liao left, the young lady in the mirror couldn't hold herself back anymore. She asked with a quivering voice, and her reddened eyes reflected the myriad of emotions running through her mind. On the other hand, through the changes Zhao Ya had undergone, Zhong Qian could tell that the Glacier Plain court hadn't been mistreating her, and there was a hint of relief in his eyes. There were countless words that he had thought that he would ask when they finally met, but in this moment of reunion, he found himself at a loss for words. All of those feelings and anticipation that overflowed in this moment of reunion left his mind completely blank. He couldn't find the right words to convey what he wanted to say in this moment. Looking at the young lady who had once walked behind his back, calling him teacher again and again, Zhong Qian's hesitant and worried voice finally sounded. Zhao Ya, how have you been? Chapter 13-15 Corridor of Puppets. In the courtyard, Zhong Qian instructed, Sun Qiong, find out if there are any pills, spirit essence, or spirit stones that are more effective than concentrated high-tier spirit stones. I wish to buy some. After the chat with Zhao Ya, he had returned to his residence. As his butler, Sun Qiong had moved into the Sanctum of Sages to stay together with him. Fortunately, his residence was rather spacious, so even with the both of them staying together, it did not feel cramped at all. Yes. Sun Qiong nodded before backing out of the residence. Most of those in the elite division were important figures from powerful organizations, and to them, what was most important at the moment was to raise their cultivation as much as possible. As such, they were assigned personal attendants to take care of miscellaneous affairs, just like how Zhongyu was assigned to Zhongqian. As Zhongxian's butler, as long as he was registered with the Sanctum of Sages, he would receive an emblem that allowed him free access in and out of the Sanctum of Sages without coming under the attack of the defensive formation. Watching at Sun Qiong's departing back, Zhongxian shook his head and sighed deeply. I really need to cultivate faster now. When he chatted with Zhao Ya the day before, he had found that although it had only been half a year since they last met, the latter's cultivation had already reached Saint 7 Dan. That was many times stronger than him. It was one thing for him to be sent flying by his future brother-in-law, but to be weaker than his students on top of that. With his current strength, how could he win Luo Ruoxin's hand in marriage? All along, he had thought that his talent was still okay, and the rate that he cultivated it was not too bad either. But at that moment, he had realized that he was nothing at all. Those around him were simply too monstrous. For this reason, as soon as he returned, he instructed Sun Qiong to find items that were rich in spiritual energy so that he could cultivate. Currently, this was also what he was lacking the most. After Sun Qiong left, Zhongxian stroked his lower jaw and thought contemplatively. There are two ways for me to swiftly raise my fighting prowess. Firstly, I can find Leaving Aperture Realm and Grand Dominion Realm cultivation technique manuals and compile the corresponding Heaven's Path divine arts and cultivate them swiftly. Secondly, I can find soul cultivation technique manuals and compile the corresponding Heaven's Path soul art to strengthen my primordial spirit. Either of these two should bring about a significant growth in my strength. Of course, if I have time, it would be best for me to find optic art manuals so as to complete the divine eyes of the 9th netherworld. If I can't cultivate the technique, I won't be able to become the head of the Sanctum of Sages. There were two ways he could quickly raise his cultivation at the moment: Zhenqi and primordial spirit. Currently, he had only compiled a portion of the Leaving Aperture Realm Heaven's Path divine art, and as for Grand Dominion Realm cultivation technique manuals, he had not seen a single one of them yet. He would have to make haste on that. So, Zhongxian took out his identity token and took a look at it for a moment before nodding slightly. In order to gain access to the cultivation technique manuals of the Sanctum of Sages, I have to prove my fighting prowess first by clearing the corridor of puppet. The longer I can last in there, the more formidable the cultivation technique manual I will be able to access. The rules of the Sanctum of Sages were vastly different from those of the Master Teacher Pavilions and Master Teacher Academies that Zhongxian had been to. If anyone wanted to browse the Sanctum's cultivation technique manuals or secret manuals, they would first have to prove that their fighting prowess had reached a level worthy of doing so. The stronger their fighting prowess, the more profound the secret manuals they would be able to access. In a sense, this was aligned with Kong Shi's philosophy of personalized guidance. If top-notch cultivation techniques were given to those who were incapable of cultivating them, it would only harm the person in question. To use an analogy from Zhongxian's previous life, this was like giving a racing car to an amateur driver. That would not be goodwill but murder. For this reason, the corridor of puppets served to evaluate the fighting prowess of those challenging it so as to determine the cultivation technique that the individual was suited for. This way, they would be able to better bring out their strength. The corridor of puppets is divided into 10 levels, namely Jiao, Yi, Bing, Ding, Wu, Ji, Gang, Xin, Ren, and Gui, and each of these levels corresponds to a couple of cultivation technique manuals. Due to the many different levels in the trial, they are able to segregate the types of cultivation techniques totally. However, what I require is quantity, not quality. Zhongxian frowned in distress. To him, it mattered not whether the cultivation technique he practiced was profound or simplistic. This was also the reason he had not been too happy when he obtained the divine eyes of the ninth netherworld and the heavenly art of dimensional unravel, perhaps showing disdain for them even. It was not because he was intentionally acting aloof to humble brag, but because no matter how profound a technique was, it was bound to have its flaws. Practicing a flawed technique made him feel as if a fishbone was stuck at the back of his throat. If he had a choice, he would rather collect 1,000 ordinary books and compile a Heaven's Path technique instead. As such, the Sanctum of Sages method of segregating the cultivation technique manuals into various tiers worked to his disadvantage. In the past, when the manuals were placed alongside one another, he could collect all of them with just a sweep of his eyes. However, now that they were divided across different levels, compiling them together would not be that easy anymore. After a moment of dilemma, Zhongxian was still unable to come up with an alternative, so he could only shake his head in defeat. Forget it, there's no point thinking so much about it at this point. I should just head over to take a look instead. Pushing open the door, he left his residence. The corridor of puppets could be considered as a type of trial, so it was located at the Hall of Solidarity. Through asking those walking along the streets for directions, it did not take long for him to arrive before a gate with a massive, Solidarity, character inscribed on it. Just like the erudition character that he had seen earlier, there was a deep conception behind it as well, but the sensation that it evoked was completely different. The erudition character induced sparks within one's mind, cultivating one's wisdom with a prolonged period of examination, granting one greater clarity of thought. On the other hand, the Solidarity character seemed to encourage magnanimity, expanding one's narrow state of mind. All of the petty frustrations and worries that plagued one's mind in the past would vanish without a trace, and feelings of friendship and brotherhood would wrap around one's heart, lingering for a very long time. The calligraphy looked simple on the surface, but it carried an imposing and forthright aura, reminiscent of a soldier charging valiantly across the battlefield. Where my solidarity lies, I shall persist even if the entire world opposes my will, Zhongxian muttered in a daze. The conception behind the Solidarity character served to promote the unity of mankind, encouraging individuals to let go of all internal grudges and unhappiness to unite against external foes. Without a doubt, this character had been left behind by Kongshaw as well. Otherwise, there was no way it could have placed Zhongxian in a daze. Vicious voice suddenly sounded at this moment, and vaguely, Zhongxian could hear him gulping. Master, if I could just eat this calligraphy, my cultivation will definitely rise by leaps and bounds. Go and play by the side. Ignoring that fellow who was thinking about eating every single day, Zhongxian began making his way into the Hall of Solidarity. The corridor of puppets was located at a corner in the Hall of Solidarity. Zhongxian swiftly found the trial that corresponded to the leaving aperture realm before heading in. The area inside was not as quiet as the Formation Master Guild branch where he had his examination previously, but there were still not many people inside. According to the details on the Jade token, it seems like multiple people can enter the corridor of puppets simultaneously. Most likely, they are all here to challenge the trial together, Zhongxian noted as he walked up to the reception. I would like to challenge the corridor of puppets for leaving aperture realm cultivation technique manuals. May I know how I go about doing it? Even though his identity token did contain some details concerning the corridor of puppets, the information provided was very brief. The receptionist was a young lady in her early 20s, and she had a particularly refreshing appearance. Upon hearing Zhongxian's question, she raised her head and explained with a smile, "You need to first pay 100 concentrated high-tier spirit stones as a registration fee, and of the 10 corridors here, you choose any of them to challenge. However, just a word of advice in advance, do not try to be too ambitious. The corridor of puppets is not easy, and arrogance may lead to you being severely wounded." I see. Zhongxian nodded. Depending on the corridor one entered, there would be a significant difference in the strength of the puppets as well. Zhongxian passed 100 concentrated high-tier spirit stones over, and after a moment of hesitation, he said, "I choose." However, before he could finish his words, a voice suddenly sounded from not too far away. "I'm going to challenge the Bing corridor. I'll be counting on you, Qingyu." The voice had a clear ring to it, a little reminiscent of the jingling of bells, and it felt very soothing to the ears. Zhongxian turned his head over to look, and he saw a young lady dressed in purple standing not too far away. She seemed to be in her 20s, and there was a slightly cold and aloof air around her. Putting aside her refined disposition, the young lady also possessed an exceptional physical appearance. In terms of beauty, she could be said to be on par with Chen Liao. "Senior Shui, you are here again. You really are diligent." The eyes of the receptionist, who had been addressed as Qingyu by the young lady, lit up, and with a chuckle, she passed a card over. "Here is your challenge token." Senior Shui took the card with a nod before she turned around and left. After Senior Shui's departure, Qingyu turned her gaze back to Zhongxian and asked, "All right, which corridor do you wish to challenge?" Zhongxian contemplated for a brief moment before replying, I think I'll choose the Bing corridor as well." Judging from the looks of it, the Jiao corridor was the most difficult one, whereas the Gui corridor was the easiest. Even though his cultivation was only at leaving Aperture Realm primary stage at the moment, in terms of fighting prowess, he could be said to be comparable to a Grand Dominion Realm primary stage expert. However, he did not have any gauge of how difficult the corridor of puppets would be yet. If it was too difficult, he would not be able to clear it. If it was too easy, the cultivation technique manuals he received would be riddled with far too many flaws. Since the young lady ahead of him had chosen the Bing corridor, it would be good for him to tag along to get a rough gauge of how powerful the puppets would be. "You want to challenge the Bing corridor? Are you sure?" Qingyu frowned in astonishment. "Yes, I'm certain." Zhongxian nodded. "Why? Is there a problem with me challenging the Bing corridor?" "That isn't what I mean." The young lady shook her head before continuing. "Senior Shui is a genius who entered the elite division several years ago, and her cultivation has already long reached leaving Aperture Realm Pinnacle. Even so, despite devoting an entire month to challenging the Bing corridor, she still hasn't cleared it. Given so, are you really certain that you want to challenge the Bing corridor? If I'm not mistaken, your cultivation should only be at leaving Aperture Realm primary stage, right? A leaving Aperture Realm Pinnacle cultivator has challenged it for a month now but has still yet to succeed." Zhongxian was shocked. He thought that he would not have much trouble clearing the corridor of puppets, but after hearing what Qingyu had said, he realized that he might have been underestimating the trial. Indeed, the Jiao corridor is the hardest corridor to clear in the corridor of puppets, and in the several dozen millenniums since the Sanctum of Sages was established, there has only been a small handful of people who have managed to clear it. There were slightly more people who had cleared the Yi corridor, but even if one adds all of them up, the number definitely won't exceed 100. Considering how difficult the first two corridors are, it should not be too difficult for you to image the difficulty of the Bing corridor too. In some years, there are cases where not even a single student manages to clear the Bing corridor. In fact, the last person who cleared the Bing corridor was the little princess of the Luo clan. As such, I really don't recommend challenging it. Qingyu shook her head. The difficulty of the Jiao, Yi, and Bing corridors had already reached a horrifying level. Putting aside a leaving Aperture Realm primary stage cultivator, even a pinnacle cultivator would find it hard to clear the challenge. For him to challenge it when it was his first time there. Truly, the ignorant know no fear. Zhongxian was startled for a moment before his eyes lit up in agitation. "You said that the little princess of the Luo clan has challenged the Bing corridor previously?" "That's right." Oblivious to the changes in Zhongxian's emotions, Qingyu continued with her earnest persuasion. "My view is that, given your current strength, it would be best for you to challenge the Gui corridor first. It's the easiest one to clear. Even though you are only at leaving Aperture Realm primary stage, as long as you possess a decent knowledge of combat, you stand a good chance of clearing the trial. As for the Bing corridor, it would be best if you dropped that notion from your mind." Shaking his head, Zhongxian said, "Thank you for your goodwill. However, I still wish to give the Bing corridor a try. If it doesn't work out, I'll return here and give the other corridors a try." Since Ruoxin had cleared the Bing corridor, he was determined to do the same as well. "You'll return here to give the other corridors a try?" Seeing that the other party was unwilling to listen to her advice, Qingyu frowned. Once the mechanism whirs into action and the puppets move, if you don't have sufficient strength to stand your ground, you could end up suffering immense damage. Knowing that the other party was trying to persuade him out of goodwill, Zhongxian replied with a smile, "I understand, but I still wish to give it a try." Those words refer to the 10 heavenly stems, which was historically used to record time. In modern-day context, and here as well, it's used more of for a numbering device. In this case, Jia would refer to the most difficult corridor, followed by Yi, Bing, Ding, all the way until Gui, which would be the easiest corridor. The Bing corridor is the third most difficult corridor. The Gui corridor is the 10th corridor, as well as the easiest one. Chapter 13:16 Banzai. Alright then. Don't regret it when you get injured. Qingyu shook her head as she passed a challenge token over to Zhongxian. If you really can't hold on any longer, just crush the challenge token, and the puppets will stop their attack. Thank you. Zhongxian clasped his fist before turning to head in the direction that Senior Shui had headed off in. Watching as Zhongxian departed, Qingyu harumphed coldly. He really is courting death. At this moment, another receptionist walked in, and upon seeing the displeased look on Qingyu's face, he asked with a smile, "What's wrong?" A leaving Aperture Realm primary stage fellow just came by earlier, and he insisted on challenging the Bing corridor. No matter how I tried to talk him out of the idea, he just wouldn't budge. Qingyu replied indignantly, seemingly upset that her goodwill had fallen on deaf ears. The lower jaw of the newly arrived receptionist fell to the ground from shock. A leaving Aperture Realm primary stage fellow actually wanted to challenge the Bing corridor? Is there something wrong with his head? As receptionists in the Hall of Solidarity, they were well aware of how difficult the Bing corridor was. Countless leaving Aperture Realm pinnacle geniuses had attempted it, only to return with looks of disappointment on their faces. So, for a mere leaving Aperture Realm primary stage cultivator to attempt to challenge it, that was clearly seeking death. I don't know if there's something wrong with his head or not, but I do know for sure that he's quite a lustful fellow. Qingyu harumphed in disdain. Not understanding what the two matters had to do with one another, the newly arrived receptionist asked in incomprehension, "Lustful?" Just a moment ago, Senior Shui said that she wanted to challenge the Bing corridor, and a second later, that fellow said that he wanted to head there, too. Given so, aren't his intentions clear for all to see? Qingyu sneered with a clear hint of derision in her tone. The newly arrived receptionist swiftly came to a realization. The corridor of puppets in the Hall of Solidarity is centered around the idea of solidarity. Depending on the number of individuals who enter a certain corridor of puppets simultaneously, the number of puppets that appear will increase correspondingly. As such, participants will have to collaborate with one another and entrust themselves to the others before they will be able to achieve victory. For that fellow to enter right behind Senior Shui, it's apparent that he wants to use this opportunity to forge intimate ties with Senior Shui. How shameless. One could challenge the corridor of puppets as an individual or as a group. As an individual, it would be an assessment on one's individual strength. As a group, it would be an assessment on the team's ability to perform synergistically to fend off the puppets. Considering how that fellow wanted to challenge the Bing corridor despite his lacking strength, it was apparent that he wanted to team up with Senior Shui so as to strike up a connection with her. After all, Senior Shui was blessed with a beautiful appearance, and she came from a good background. Even within the sanctum of sages, she could be considered a celebrity. There were countless students who wanted to get close with her, but that fellow was probably the first one who dared to be so bold about the matter. It seemed like lust had really shrouded his rationality for him to act so impudently. Indeed. However, with strength like his, he will only be a nuisance to Senior Shui in the examination. This will only make him incur her ire. Qingyu smirked smugly. Senior Shui had been visiting their corridor of puppets for more than a month now, and it was apparent that she intended to clear the trial alone. So, if that young man barged in at this moment and forced a collaboration with her, it would result in the foiling of her plans, and more importantly than that, he would be dragging her down. It would already be a miracle if Senior Shui did not resent him for that, so how could she possibly generate goodwill toward him over such a matter? You're right. Let's just wait and see. He'll probably climb out in a half-death state later, the newly arrived attendant said with a smile. Unaware of the conversation between the two receptionists, Zhongxian followed behind Senior Shui, and not too long later, he found himself standing before a door. Inscribed on the door was a Bing character. Senior Shui took out the challenge token that she had been given and swiped it lightly in front of the door. With a deep rumbling sound, the stone door gradually opened. Shortly after the stone door closed behind her, Zhongxian headed forward and copied what she had done, and he successfully entered the door as well. The sight before him blurred for a moment, and before he knew it, he found himself standing in a vast room. The room was circular in shape, reminiscent of a dueling ring. There were seals that could isolate auras and neutralize might installed all over the room so as to ensure that the walls would not be damaged. Who are you? Senior Shui had already positioned herself at the center of the room, and she had just prepared herself to face the puppets when she suddenly saw Zhongxian walk in. In an instant, her face darkened. If 2 or more people entered prior to the start of the trial, the collaborative mode would be triggered instead. At least 2 puppets would appear, and the nature of the duel would become vastly different from before. I'm here to challenge the corridor of puppets, too. Isn't there no limit to the number of people who can participate in the trial? You don't need to care about me, just do whatever you have to do, Zhongxian said with a smile. In his identity token, it was only reflected that it was possible for multiple students to challenge the corridor of puppets simultaneously, but there was no clear explanation of the rules. As a result, he had no idea that the crux to a multi-challenger mode was teamwork. On the contrary, he even thought that it was an independent trial, where everyone would be taking the test one by one. After all, it was rare for there to be any examination involving teamwork. It worked in his favor that the other party had come in earlier. This would be a good opportunity for him to spectate the happenings in the trial, and through doing so, he would be able to roughly gauge the difficulty and make preparations in advance. Don't hold me back, or else I'll make you die a horrible death. Senior Shui narrowed her eyes threateningly and harumphed coldly. Hold you back? What do you mean by that? Zhongxian was startled by the abrupt remark. He was just about to probe deeper when the gears of a mechanism in the room began whirring into the action. Jeji jeji. Following which, the door ahead of them opened, and a puppet walked out. Dressed in black, the puppet looked no different from a real man. Upon seeing Senior Shui at the center of the room, it immediately dashed out. Hong Long. At the same time, a formation in the surroundings activated. This formation had an effect similar to a leaving aperture realm cultivator's spatial lock, turning the surrounding air exceptionally viscous, thus hindering one's movement and exertion of strength. Humph. Facing an abrupt assault from the puppet, Senior Shui had no time to say anything at all. Thus, with a swift step forward, she engaged the puppet. It had to be said that Senior Shui did wield considerable strength. While her cultivation was at leaving aperture realm pinnacle, in terms of fighting prowess, she would not lose out to any half-grand Dominion realm cultivators. The cultivation technique that she practices is of the water attribute, carrying a concept of relentless. Individually, her strikes don't wield much power, but when they are strung together, they turn into a raging flood that none will be able to withstand. Zhongxian noted. In terms of absolute strength of their strikes, Senior Shui seemed to be severely lacking as compared to the puppets. However, what was fearsome about her was how she was able to build on the momentum of her previous move to enhance the might of her subsequent strikes, causing her to build up more and more power over the course of the battle, till the point where she was no longer stoppable. A single droplet of water might seem insignificant, but with time, it could pierce through even a boulder. Such was the type of strength that Senior Shui wielded. Despite her seemingly gentle movements, the rampaging blows from the puppets were still unable to breach her defenses, reminiscent of a steel hammer attempting to strike a flowing river. No matter how powerful one struck, after the might subsided, everything would just revert to its original form. After trading roughly a dozen blows, the young lady's eyebrows shot up as she bellowed furiously. You aren't going to get the better of me. Then, she raised her palm and pressed it furiously on the puppet's chest during an opening. Pang! With a burst of zhenqi, the puppet was forced back 8 steps, leaving a series of footprints on the ground. Raw. However, despite the immense force behind her strike, the puppet still managed to swiftly regain its balance. On the contrary, it seemed to have grown even more enraged due to the attack, and it began moving at a faster speed than before. Sylar. Sharp claws tore through the air with a frighteningly shrill gale as they rushed right for the young lady before them. Zhongxian shook his head and sighed. Even though she's able to maintain the might behind her attack, and her defense is excellent, her flaws are apparent. It's a pity that she takes too long to charge up sufficient power, thus making it difficult for her to strike during opportune moments. It was true that the young lady could become an extremely fearsome adversary once she built up sufficient might, but the problem was that everything would begin anew once her chain offense was broken. Furthermore, there were times where the puppet had shown openings in the midst of the battle, but because her strength had yet to build up sufficiently, she had been unable to capitalize on those opportunities to deal a decisive blow to her opponent. For example, with the previous move, if it had been Zhongxian in her place, he would have blasted the puppet's head open with a single punch. However, the young lady had only managed to push it back several steps, failing to deal critical damage. It really is a huge pity. Zhongxian shook his head and sighed. While he was shaking his head and sighing, Senior Shui was on the verge of going insane. Watching the overwhelming might that the puppet was attacking her with, her face turned ghastly pale. She retreated hurriedly, forming an elegant trajectory in the air. TZ La. Even though her evasive maneuver was swift, it was still insufficient to outrun the nimble movements of the puppet's claw. With a resounding rip, a portion of her clothes were torn off, and a blooded gorge appeared on her shoulder. Boom. Seeing that its strike had failed to strike Senior Shui's vitals, the puppet seemed to have gotten a little frustrated. Thus, right after seeing that its claws had missed its mark, it immediately switched its attack to a palm strike and pressed it firmly down on the young lady. While there was no zhenqi devoted to the palm strike, the puppet wielded strength on par with half-grand Dominion realm experts. On top of that, the surrounding formation was making it difficult for the challenger to exert her strength. As a result, when the palm fell, it felt as if the space within the room had completely frozen in place, making it impossible for anyone to escape. Seeing that the palm strike was just about to land on her, Senior Shui gritted her teeth in resolution. It was probably a secret art of some kind, but her figure suddenly elongated into what looked like a long strand of noodle, allowing her to escape from the palm strike in the nick of time. However, when she reverted to her original form, her face had turned visibly paler. It seemed like the secret art had taken a heavy toll on her. As she panted heavily, she turned around to see what the young man, who had forced her independent battle into a team battle, was doing, only to see the latter with one arm crossed over his body and the other supporting his lower jaw, seemingly enjoying the spectacle before him. You! Seeing this sight, Senior Shui nearly exploded on the spot. Since it's a team battle, you should at least make a move, right? To be standing without moving, as if a corpse, what the heck are you planning to do? Just as Senior Shui was able to beckon Zhongxian to join in as well, another door in front abruptly opened with a resounding jia and yet another puppet rushed out. As the young man had not stepped onto the battlefield, the puppet rushed right for Senior Shui as soon as it appeared. Just one puppet was already enough to corner her, and yet, in this moment, two of them were rushing at her simultaneously. In an instant, Senior Shui felt immense pressure heaping down on her, cloaking her face in sweat. These puppets wield strength comparable to Zhongxian. Unaware of the young lady's thoughts, Zhongxian continued assessing the situation before him. It was no wonder others would say that the Bing corridor was extremely difficult to clear. The strength of the puppets was indeed fearsome. It was true that Zhongxian was unable to even evade a single move from him prior to the entrance examination, but that still did not change the fact that he was a half-leaving aperture realm cultivator. On top of that, he also wielded the unique bloodline ability of the Zhong clan. With such prowess, there were few who would be a match for him, and the fact that he had nearly gotten into the elite division was proof of the fact. Considering that Senior Shui was faced against such an opponent, it was truly impressive that she had been able to survive for that long against the puppet. It's a pity. It seems like she's going to fail the trial. Zhongxian sighed. Having watched the battle ever since its start, he already had a clear picture of the level of strength that Senior Shui wielded. It would have been difficult for her to defeat a single puppet, let alone subduing the both of them simultaneously. It was just a matter of time before she failed the trial. It was no wonder she had been unable to clear the trial despite devoting an entire month to it. The trial was truly merciless. Later on, when it's my turn, I'll knock out the two puppets simultaneously, not giving them an opportunity to work together at all. Zhong Xian quickly ran through his decided course of action before nodding confidently. The collaboration between the two puppets was incredible, such that even he could have had trouble dealing with them. Since that was the case, it would be better for him to take the initiative and knock them out as soon as the examination began. At the very least, he should get rid of one of the puppets instantaneously first. Damn it! With her face drenched in sweat, Senior Shui found herself swiftly approaching her limits. She had thought that the young man would step in to help her, but he was still standing by the side, staring at the situation curiously as if he had nothing to do with it at all. Overwhelmed with rage, Senior Shui puffed up her chest and roared, "Just how long do you plan on staring at the situation for?" "Ah!" Not expecting to be reprimanded over that, Zhong Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, "Then, what else am I supposed to do?" "Why you?" So furious that she could explode, Senior Shui accidentally lost her balance in battle, resulting in her being struck by one of the puppet's palm strikes. The fiery pain in her shoulder left her feeling even more frenzied, and she furiously bellowed, "Aren't you going to make a move? What the heck is this? You were the one who barged in to trigger the multi-challenger mode, but in the end, you left me to deal with the puppets by myself while you idle by the side. Even if you are weak, surely the least you could do for the team is to disturb the puppets and hinder them from attacking me. Make a move." Zhong Xian had a conflicted look on his face. This was the young lady's trial, so if he interfered in it, would he not be flouting the rules? After some thought, an idea came to Zhong Xian's mind. He placed his fist horizontally against his body, and with earnestness and anticipation written all over his face, he yelled, "Senior Shui, you can do it. Senior Shui, you can do it. Banzai." The Bing corridor is the third most difficult corridor of puppets to challenge. Chapter 13:17 I didn't do it on purpose. Upon hearing the shouting, Senior Shui looked as if she had seen a ghost. She turned her head over to look at the young man cheering fervently for her, and unable to withstand it any longer, she spurted a mouthful of blood. The hell? While other teams have reliable experts to watch their back, what is with this fool I was assigned? You can do it. Banzai. Banzai your head. I am about to be killed over here, and I'm seeking for your help. Yet, why the heck are you cheering for me over there? Do I look like I need your cheering? I want you to make a move. Make a move. Senior Shui's body trembled uncontrollably from frenzy, and she felt as if she was on the verge of losing her mind. If two challengers were to enter the corridor of puppets within a short interval of one another, the mechanism of the trial would immediately deem them as a team. This was common knowledge among those of the Sanctum of Sages, and even those who did not know would at least have enough sense to ask about it. We are in a two-player challenge mode, so how can you stand idly by the side? How am I supposed to deal with so many puppets by myself? Initially, Senior Shui thought that the fellow had entered the trial in order to claim her affection, but from the looks of it now, it seemed to be the complete opposite. The young man was not trying to claim her affection but her life. Otherwise, why would he continue spectating by the side when the second puppet had already appeared? Hula! On the verge of exploding, her first instinct was to lash out at the young man. Unfortunately, the puppet before her did not give her a chance to do so. The first puppet sent a fist flying toward her. The deafening sonic booms around her made Senior Shui realize that if she got distracted at this point, she might very well lose her life. Cold sweat broke out all over her body as she activated her secret art once more. Her body immediately began to thread through the attacks of the puppets nimbly, reminiscent of a water snake. It was a close shave, but she managed to escape from the punch. After escaping from the attack, her breathing visibly hastened further, and her face turned even paler. Her secret art was actually the ability of her unique bloodline, and it drained her deeply each time she used it. She would have to rest for an extensive period before she could recover from her exertion. Over the past month, she had not used it once. That day, she had made up her mind to go all out, especially since she had already gotten accustomed to the fighting pattern of the puppet, and she was planning to create a new record this time around. But who would have thought that she would end up being dragged down by this atrocious young man? Being forced to face 2 puppets alone, she ended up using her secret art twice in a short interval. At this point, her body was already nearing its limit. This won't do. If this goes on, I might very well lose my life. Do I really have to admit defeat? Senior Shuei gritted her teeth in indignation. It had already taken an entire month for her to grow accustomed to the fighting style of the puppet, and she was certain that she could have cleared the trial with relative ease by tapping into the power of her unique bloodline. Yet, such a situation ended up happening instead. Once her bloodline was activated, it would take at least a month of rest before she would be able to return to her peak condition. Too many things would have to be put back like that. I can't give up. Senior Shuei clenched her fists tightly in determination. I must find a way to throw one of the puppets to that fellow, and once I get rid of one of them, the rest will be easy. While panting heavily, she made up her mind. Competition in the Sanctum of Sages was extremely strife. She could not afford to lose a month over this, so she could only gamble. While that fellow who was shouting "do your best" by the side was unreliable, as long as she could get the puppet over to his side, as one of the teammates, he would come under attack as well. If she could fling off one of the puppets to him, she would be able to find a chance to turn the tables around. Of course, she understood that the young man would be put in danger as a result of that, but there was nothing that could be done. Since he had chosen to challenge the Bing corridor, he would have to shoulder some of the danger. As long as that unreliable fellow can last a dozen breaths for me to destroy the first puppet, I should be able to come to his aid afterward. Senior Shuei harumphed. Humph, who told him to sabotage my attempt in the first place? He ought to suffer a little bit for his actions. Without any hesitation, she jolted her body slightly, a little reminiscent of the strings of a zither being pulled on. Who? As if a taut rubber band being released, her figure abruptly vanished from the spot. The next moment, she was already in Zhong Xian's vicinity. Do your best. Zhong Xian was still in the midst of cheering when the young lady abruptly appeared in front of him, and he froze in astonishment. I'll be leaving one of them to you. Looking at the startled look on the young man's face, even though Senior Shuei felt a little infuriated on the inside, she still felt obliged to warn him. You will be leaving one of them to me. While Zhong Xian was confused by the situation, 2 puppets had already rushed up to him. The immense might that they wielded caused an overwhelming pressure to weigh down upon him. Catcher. One of the puppets smashed a fist right toward Zhong Xian's face. Isn't this against the rules? Zhong Xian was taken aback. He was there just to watch the commotion and learn from his senior. If he intervened in the duel, wouldn't her results be invalidated? Would he be disqualified from the trial as a result of that as well? However, considering the furious assault that one of the puppets was launching against him, this was not the time for him to be thinking about such stuff. He dodged the puppet's attack nimbly with a side step, and at the same time, he shot a glance at the young lady not too far away. She was currently dealing with the other puppet. A spurt of fresh blood escaped her mouth, and an immense power was swiftly engulfing her body, bringing her fighting prowess up to great heights in an instant. Is there a need to go this far to challenge a trial? Zhong Xian could tell that she was using a secret art more potent than the one before, and he could not help but shake his head. Secret arts had the ability to enhance one's fighting prowess greatly in the short term, but they had their downfalls as well. For one, they were extremely damaging to one's body. While secret arts allowed a cultivator to exceed their limits temporarily, this overexertion would result in an unbearable toll on their spirit, zhenqi, and physical body, thus placing them in a long down period. In fact, there were some that would sap one's life force, causing one's lifespan to be shortened. It was for this reason that Zhong Xian never used secret arts. Well, another reason was that he did not know any of those secret arts. The young lady was already spurting blood, and yet, she was still insistently using her secret arts. She was really putting her life on the line. Zhong Xian sighed deeply, but before he could delve deeper into his feeling of lamentation, The puppet before him was already charging toward him with a body slam. Wait a moment, you are supposed to be assessing her. Aren't you attacking the wrong target over here? Zhongxian exclaimed as he halted the charging puppet back by placing a finger of his on the latter's head. Just who the heck designed the corridor of puppets? Shouldn't the puppets at least have the basic ability to discern who the challenger is? I am only here to watch how the trial works. It isn't my turn yet, so why are you flinging your fists and howling at me? Roar. Roar. Being blocked out by a single finger further enraged the puppet. An aura of ferocity emanated from it as it drove its strength to its very limits, rotating its arms so swiftly that it almost appeared like a wheel. However, with its head being kept at bay by Zhongxian's finger, no matter how fast its hands rotated, it was unable to hurt Zhongxian. Instead, it felt like an electric fan, bringing a cooling breeze to him. Since I didn't harm the puppet at all, this can't be considered as an infringement of the rules, right? Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction. As he did not really interfere with the trial of another, his actions could only be considered as legitimate self-defense, and he did not destroy anything. His right to challenge the trial should not be revoked. After all the trouble he had gone through to come here, it would really be a huge annoyance if that was the case. After keeping the puppet before him under control, he turned his sight back to the battling young lady and puppet. After executing her secret art, while Senior Shui's complexion appeared to have considerably worsened, her fighting prowess did soar by leaps and bounds. She was nearly twice as strong as before. Peng 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 peng. Previously, she had been forced to evade the puppet's attacks and find an opening to strike, but with her enhanced strength, she was already able to go head-to-head with the puppet. Under their furious clash, even the formation around the corridor of puppets seemed to shake unstably. Her secret art is powerful, but, as a practitioner of water attribute cultivation techniques, she's abandoning her own strengths by going head-on with the enemy. Zhongxian frowned. With his current comprehension of combat, even without using the Library of Heaven's Path and Eye of Insight, he could still be considered a grandmaster. Those who cultivated water attribute cultivation techniques were capable of encompassing everything, and yet, the young lady actually chose to go head-to-head with her opponent. She was clearly abandoning her very own roots. It's true that this is the most efficient way for her to defeat the puppet given the current circumstances, but she will suffer tremendous damage as well. In fact, even her state of mind might waver. Cultivators pursuing their own paths had to have absolute confidence in their cultivation techniques. Considering that the young lady practiced arts of the flexible water, it would be in contradiction to her own beliefs to engage in rigid and forceful offense. This would be a reflection that she had started doubting her path, and just like how the mind could influence the body could also influence the mind. Even if she managed to eventually defeat the puppet, this seed of doubt planted in her mind could have massive repercussions in the future. Since I have already seen it, it wouldn't do for me to just watch idly by the side. After a moment of hesitation, Zhongxian still chose to speak up. That. Senior Shui, you won't last long like this. I won't last long like this. Senior Shui was in the midst of battling against the puppet when she heard those words and jolted for an instant. She had thought that by dumping a puppet with him, the young man would surely be chased all around the room like a rat running across the street. Yet, why was his voice still so clear, devoid of the slightest hint of exertion? He even had the leisure to say that she could not last long. She was a lady, so who said that she could not last long? The one who is unable to last long enough should be you. Senior Shui harumphed coldly as she shot a glance in the direction where the voice originated from. The next moment, her body froze. The puppet that had left her in such a tough spot was currently throwing its arms forward like a shrew, and it was running forward so forcefully that a huge depression had been left on the ground. Yet, due to a finger placed on its forehead, it was simply unable to advance a single step forward. What the heck is going on? Wasn't the puppet extremely ferocious and powerful when it was fighting against me? Why does it seem like it is acting coquettishly at this moment instead? Could it be that this unkempt leaving Aperture Realm primary stage fellow is actually a hidden expert? Hula. Even though Senior Shui was shocked beyond words, the puppet she was facing could not possibly give her any time to take a breather. It immediately launched its second wave of attacks. Left with no time for thought, she could only put aside the matter and hurriedly raise her guard. However, due to her guard being put up in a rush, she was eventually overpowered and was forced several steps back. A suffocating sensation devoured her chest, and she felt her blood running erratically in her body, causing her body to ache greatly. Suppressing the urge to vomit blood, Senior Shuei asked with gritted teeth, "What do you mean by I can't last long like this? It won't do for you to go head-on against the puppet. Given your strength, there's no need for you to do this to defeat it," Zhongxian explained. Hula! An abrupt gale of wind blasted toward Senior Shuei's face. Astonished, she hurriedly backed away, but the shockwave from the puppet's punch still resulted in a red streak forming across her face, dealing her a searing pain. With a few swift maneuvers, she quickly created some distance between her and the puppet before asking anxiously, "Then how else should I face the puppets? Will it be against the rules if I offer you guidance?" Zhongxian asked hesitantly. "Of course not." Senior Shuei's body staggered upon hearing those words. "We are in a two-player challenge mode. How in the world would you offering guidance to me be against the rules? That's a relief." With a quick sigh, Zhongxian was just about to impart some wisdom to Senior Shuei when the puppet before him suddenly went on a rampage. Roar! It had struggled free from the might of his finger and charged forward. "What are you roaring for? Can't you see that I'm busy?" Displeased, Zhongxian sent a casual slap toward the puppet. Pa! The puppet's head rotated twice on its neck before being sent flying. Putong! It collapsed on the ground convulsing, clearly losing all fighting prowess. Not expecting that a casual punch from him would cause that fellow's head to be sent flying, Zhongxian's lips twitched in frenzy. "Did I accidentally use too much strength? But I didn't do it on purpose." Chapter 13:18 Continue with the trials. He honestly did not do it on purpose. The puppet was simply moving too fast, so he subconsciously dealt it a slap. Who was to know that it was so fragile, such that its head would be blown right off? Senior Shuei was dumbstruck as well. While the puppet had her tortured to the point where she nearly wanted to die, she had used everything at her disposal but was still unable to defeat it. That fellow had managed to knock off the puppet's head with just a casual slap. Did it really have to be that exaggerated? Is actually that powerful? Senior Shuei's body trembled out of sheer astonishment. No matter how slow-witted she might have been, it was apparent that the young man before her was an extremely powerful expert. With just a finger, he was able to keep the puppet at bay, and with a palm, he was able to slap away the puppet's head. His fighting prowess was countless times more powerful than hers. "I really didn't do it on purpose. Why don't we do this instead? As long as you don't revoke my right to challenge the trial, I'll help you fit back your head, and you can continue on your attack." With how things had played out, he could not be bothered with offering guidance to Senior Shuei anymore. He quickly squatted down and placed the puppet's head back onto its neck. He had only entered the corridor of puppets to gain some insight into how the trial worked. It would truly be a tragedy if he was disqualified just because he accidentally interfered in another challenger's trial. Just as she finally found a slight bit of respect for the young man, the latter's subsequent actions caused her rage to surpass previous levels. There are plenty of challengers who accidentally destroy the puppets in the midst of the trial. Do you really need to be so apologetic? Besides, it's useless for you to install the puppet's head right back on. While puppets, unlike humans, would not die just because their heads had been lopped off, their internal structure was still an intricate system of gears and so on. Only professional celestial designers would be able to fix them. What in the world do you hope to achieve by pressing the head back on? Just as Senior Shuei was just about to lecture the young man on the matter, the puppet she was facing suddenly charged at her once more, leaving her with no choice but to turn her attention back to the battle. After trading a few blows, she finally managed to knock back the puppet and gain a temporary moment of respite. She immediately turned her gaze toward the young man and saw the latter helping the puppet up. In this moment, the puppet's head had already been placed back onto its neck. "I'm done." Zhongxian patted his hands together as he nodded in satisfaction. "Not only did I help you repair your damage, I also fixed some of your flaws as well. With this, you should be able to exert your full strength once more." Roar! The puppet glanced at Zhongxian with a look of incomprehension. Don't worry. I didn't mean to interrupt in your battle earlier. Feel free to continue what you were doing, I won't intervene. Zhongxian waved his hand. Ah! The puppet scratched its head as it slowly extended its fist toward Zhongxian. Just as it was about to hit Zhongxian, it suddenly recalled how the latter had managed to lop off its head with a single slap, and it hurriedly retracted its hand and leaped backward fearfully. It looked at Zhongxian with a slightly tilted head, as if asking, "Are you really not going to intervene?" "I won't, don't worry," Zhongxian replied with an affirmative nod. Roar! With an excited war cry, the puppet turned around and dashed for the young lady in the room. "Aye!" Senior Shui's goosebumps immediately rose from her arms, and she nearly fainted on the spot. "Brother, did you really come here to sabotage me? Do you know that we are a team?" By smacking off the head of one of the puppets, we were already halfway there to victory, so why in the world are you fixing the puppet's head? Is the issue perhaps in your head? It's already difficult for me to cope with one of them, but you want me to face two of them simultaneously? Will you only be glad after killing me? Initially, Senior Shui had thought that the other party had come here to catch her attention and win her fancy, but from the looks of it now, to be honest, she would rather it have been the former. At the very least, she would not lose her life. Just as she was about to curse Zhongxian, the other puppet arrived before her. Its punch was way faster and more powerful than the puppet she was facing. Even before it came close to Senior Shui, she already felt as if her body had been suppressed by a dominion, preventing her from moving at all. What's going on? Senior Shui narrowed her eyes in bewilderment. She had fought with the puppet of the Bing corridor for a month now, and even if the puppet was more powerful than her, the disparity between the both of them should not have been too great. When did the puppet become so strong? However, this was not the time for thought. She quickly raised her fists to defend against the latter's attack. Pa! As soon as her palm came into contact with the other party's fist, a crushing pressure pushed at her chest, leaving her feeling as if something heavy had crashed into her. The next moment, her entire body shot backward. Pu! Even while she was in midair, fresh blood spurted from her mouth. She crashed heavily into the wall behind her, creating a shaped imprint behind her. You! While hanging on the wall, Senior Shui's body convulsed non-stop. The world seemed incomparably dark to her. Previously, the strength of the puppet had been acceptable to her. If she were to use her full might, she would have been able to achieve victory. But why was it that, after its head had been lopped off and it had been modified slightly by the young man, it grew so powerful? How were they supposed to fight like that? Forget it, it might be better for me to just admit defeat. It really felt like she had used up her entire lifetime's worth of frustration on this trial. Just as she was about to crush her challenge token to halt the trial, she suddenly recalled that it was a collaboration. If one of them were to admit defeat, it would be deemed as a loss for the entire team. So, with gritted teeth, she turned to the young man standing not too far away. I can't defeat the puppets, so I'm going to admit defeat now. As this is a team battle, you will be deemed to have lost as well. Team battle? Zhongxian was startled by those words. What do you mean by that? You really don't know? Senior Shui harumphed coldly. As you entered the Bing corridor right after me, the mechanism automatically registers both of us as a team. As long as one of us admits defeat, it'll be considered a loss for the entire team. We are actually a team. And if you admit defeat, I will lose as well. Zhongxian widened his eyes in shock. All along, he had thought that the trial would be an individual assessment, especially since this was how most examinations worked in the Master-Teacher Pavilion. Yet, after the whole farce that they had been through, it turned out to be a team battle. There was actually such a system in the Sanctum of Sages. Of course. What else did you think would happen? Senior Shui snapped impatiently. In the end, it turned out that the young man really did not know anything at all. That explained everything. Nevertheless, even knowing that he did not do it intentionally could not quell the rage and frenzy she was feeling at that very moment. Wait a moment, don't admit defeat, Zhongxian exclaimed in shock. If she admitted defeat, his trial would finish before he could do anything at all. He had not even collected the cultivation technique manuals in the corridor yet, so how could he admit defeat? I apologize for doing nothing earlier. I honestly did not know that it was a team battle. Give me a moment. I'll get rid of those puppets right now. After understanding what was going on, how could Zhongxian still dilly-dally? He turned to the two puppets on the field and declared, "Your opponent is me. Come at me together." Roar! The puppet whose head had been sent flying by Zhongxian earlier took a step back as it shook its head fervently, indicating its complete refusal toward the notion of fighting against Zhongxian. "Didn't you say that you wouldn't intervene in the battle earlier? Why are you looking at me with that cold glint in your eyes? You aren't coming? I guess I'll have to go over there myself then." With a cold harumph, Zhongxian took a step forward and entered the battlefield. Roar! Facing Zhongxian's provocations, the other puppet could not hold itself back anymore and charged at him. However, before it could get far, it immediately felt something grabbing at its arm, holding it back. Turning around, it saw its puppet comrade shaking its head desperately, seemingly pleading for it not to go. Roar! Roar! The other puppet was completely bewildered by the actions of its comrade. It tried to shake off the grip of its comrade to challenge Zhongxian to a fight. Roar! Roar! Seeing that the other puppet refused to back down, the puppet comrade decisively sent a slap over to its face. Not expecting its comrade to make a move on it, the other puppet blacked out before it could even process what was going on. Putong! Unconscious, it collapsed flimsily to the ground. After which, the puppet carefully turned its gaze to Zhongxian and bowed slightly. Roar! Then, it struck its head with its own palm. Pada! It collapsed to the ground as well. That's more like it. Seeing how obedient the puppet he had modified was, Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction. He turned his gaze to Senior Shuai and asked, "This should be considered a clear for the trial, right?" Senior Shuai. It took quite some time before she managed to recover from her daze. She looked at the young man in front of her with a look that was even more shocked than she would have been if she had seen a ghost instead. To make the puppets fight among themselves and even knock itself out. Just how in the world did he manage to do that? We really cleared the trial. After consuming a pill and recovering slightly from her injuries, Senior Shuai struggled out from the wall while panting heavily. To be honest, she could still hardly believe what was going on. It was already extremely difficult to clear a trial by oneself, and the difficulty of a team battle was many times greater than an individual battle. To succeed under such circumstances, she could not help but feel as if she was dreaming. But again, it was no wonder she would feel like that. Even after a month of hard work, she still had not succeeded in clearing the Bing corridor. It was a little hard for her to believe that she had really cleared the trial just like that. Zhongxian was not too sure about the rules, and he took a glance at the two unconscious puppets on the ground before remarking, "Since we have defeated the puppets, it should be considered a clear for us." The modified puppet seemed to have noticed Zhongxian's gaze on it, and its body trembled slightly. It hurriedly shut its eyes tighter. UN. Senior Shuai nodded. There were many questions that she would have liked to ask, but in her moment of shock, she had no idea how she should construct her words. In this moment, the sound of whirring mechanisms sounded, and a door slowly opened. "Let's head in to take a look." Walking into the door, Zhongxian's eyes lit up in excitement. Inside was a bookshelf with several books stacked on it. This was probably the prize for clearing the Bing corridor. UN Senior Shuai's motive for challenging the Bing corridor was to obtain these cultivation technique manuals, so she hurriedly walked up to the bookshelf in agitation. There were only 10 books or so, but they were all extremely profound cultivation techniques, far stronger than those he had seen in the black market. Grandiflora cultivation technique, Jade Tree Sky Piercing Formula, Art of Golden Flames. With a swift sweep, Zhongxian collected them into the Library of Heaven's Path, and after compiling them together with the other books, he could not help but shake his head in disappointment. He had thought that he would be able to compile a complete Leaving Aperture Realm Heaven's Path divine art like this, but it seemed like quantity was indeed far more important than quality when it came to compilation. Geez. Zhongxian sighed deeply, thinking that the compensation was not worth the effort at all. To spend 100 concentrated high-tier spirit stones just to see 10 or so books, That really was not worth the price for him. At this moment, a female's voice sounded. All right, I've made up my mind. Shifting his gaze over, Zhongxian saw that Senior Shui had picked out the rippling water profound art, the only water attribute cultivation technique in the limited collection. That book is indeed not too bad. Zhongxian nodded in approval. While that cultivation technique was not necessarily stronger than the one that Senior Shui was already cultivating, it did complement her current cultivation technique well. Studying the manual could serve as a great source of inspiration for her future cultivation. Yuan, I'll begin copying the content now. Have you chosen your book yet? Senior Shui asked. Those who had cleared the corridor of puppets could not take away the physical copy of the manuals inside, but they were allowed to copy them. Me? Zhongxian shook his head. I won't be copying any. I still need to continue with the trials, so I'll be taking my leave. He had already collected all of those books in his library of Heaven's Path, so there was no need for him to copy them again. Continue with the trials? Senior Shui was taken aback for an instant before her eyes lit up in agitation. It can't be that you are going to challenge the Yi corridor? Considering how easily the young man before her had managed to clear the Bing corridor, it was a given that he would not be interested in the cultivation techniques here, especially since he stood a good chance at clearing the higher levels. It would already be a blessing if a single student cleared the Yi corridor every decade. Would the young man before her be able to successfully clear it as well? In an instant, she felt as if she might just be lucky enough to see a miracle being forged right before her eyes. Yi corridor? That's not it. Zhongxian shook his head. I intend to challenge the Gui corridor. Yi corridor is the second strongest. Bing corridor is the third strongest. That's the 10th strongest corridor, also the weakest one. Chapter 1319 sounds a little inauspicious, what? Senior Shui's body jolted, and her eyes widened in shock. In this moment, she felt as if blood was flowing to and fro her throat, threatening to spill out at any moment. You are going to challenge the Gui corridor? The Gui corridor was the easiest trial of all, and only the weakest students of the Sanctum of Sages would head there. Given how you were able to easily defeat 2 puppets of the Bing corridor so easily, why in the world do you want to challenge the Gui corridor? While others were slowly advancing forward, that fellow was actually regressing with time. Are you here just to brush up your existence? That's right. The manuals in the Bing corridor isn't too good, so I'm intending to head to the Gui corridor for a look. Zhongxian replied earnestly. The more profound and powerful a cultivation technique was, the fewer of them there would be. What Zhongxian needed was to collect as many cultivation technique manuals as possible. As such, he was extremely disappointed when he saw the pitiful collection of books that was at the end of the Bing corridor. He felt that he had made the wrong choice and should have gone to the Gui corridor instead. There were bound to be many more books there, and that would be more useful to him than challenging the Bing corridor. Senior Shui clutched her hair. Are you a lunatic? Every single cultivation technique in the Bing corridor is extremely profound and powerful. Admittedly, they can't compare with the cultivation technique I have inherited from my ancestors, but they still wield formidable prowess. Are you honestly comparing such treasures to the trash in the Gui corridor? Just what in the world is going through your mind? All right, you should continue copying your notes. I have to get going now. Zhongxian turned around and began making his way out of the Bing corridor. As he walked, sighs of lamentation would escape from his lips. This trip had truly been a huge waste. By the time he walked out of the Bing corridor and arrived before the reception once more, he found that other than the female receptionist named Qingyu, there was another male receptionist sitting beside her. Seeing how the young man had come out so quickly without any injuries on him, Qingyu was stunned. She couldn't help but ask in bewilderment, "Are you fine?" She was certain that the fellow would be pummeled to the point that no one would be able to recognize him anymore, an incomparable sight of misery, so how could he still be completely fine? One must know that the Bing corridor was a trial which even the talented Senior Shui had yet to clear after a month of hard work. Fine? Why would I not be fine? Taken aback by the abrupt question, Zhongxian was startled for a moment. Then, seeing that there was no response from Qingyu, He took out 100 concentrated high-tier spirit stones and passed it over. I wish to challenge the corridor of puppets once more. Here are the spirit stones. You want to challenge it once more? Qingyu frowned in bewilderment. Each person can only challenge a corridor of puppets once a day. I'm afraid that you will have to return tomorrow. If each challenger could keep challenging the same corridor of puppets again and again, putting aside that he would be depriving other challengers of the opportunity to challenge, the corridor of puppets would not have sufficient time to recover as well. As such, each challenger was limited to challenging a corridor of puppets once per day. And under normal circumstances, those who had managed to clear the corridor of puppets wouldn't challenge the same corridor once more, and those who failed would be left in a tragic state, possibly being unable to move even after an entire day of rest. Only someone as tenacious as Senior Shui would be able to persistently challenge the same Bing corridor every single day for a month straight. I'm not going to challenge the Bing corridor, Zhong Xian explained. So, you have finally thought things through. Qingyu heaved a sigh of relief. Which corridor of puppets will you be challenging then? The Ding corridor? No, I'm intending on challenging the Gui corridor, Zhong Xian replied. The Gui corridor. Qingyu was rendered speechless. She was still wondering how formidable that fellow was when he challenged the Bing corridor as soon as he came, but from the looks of it now, it seemed like the results had been rather disastrous for him. In the end, he still had to start from the very bottom. Well, to be fair, for a leaving Aperture Realm primary stage cultivator, even the Gui corridor would pose a great difficulty. In a sense, it was good that the young man was able to think things through and pursue something that was more feasible to him than to cling on to his meaningless pride. I told you earlier that you should have just challenged the Gui corridor. It's really a huge pity for you to have wasted 100 concentrated high-tier spirit stones just like that. But nevertheless, it's still good to see that you have come to your senses. Qingyu smiled as she took out another challenge token and passed it over. Right, where's the challenge token you have used in the Bing corridor? Regardless of whether you have used it or not, you'll have to return it to us. Here it is. Zhong Xian took the challenge token which Qingyu was offering him before passing back the Bing corridor's challenge token he had received earlier. After which, he turned around and headed off to the Gui corridor. Shortly after he left, the male receptionist turned to Qingyu and asked, "Is that the lustful fellow that you have spoken about earlier?" "That's right." Qingyu nodded. "I have to say that he's rather handsome, but to challenge the Bing corridor with his leaving Aperture Realm primary stage cultivation, he's indeed a little over his head," the male receptionist remarked. "It's apparent that he's not a person who lacked money. He probably did that in order to strike up a connection with Senior Shui. But from the looks of it, his efforts seem to have ended in futility. Realizing the limitations of his strength, he had no choice but to challenge the Gui corridor instead." Qingyu shook her head as she prepared to toss the challenge token which she had received from the young man earlier back into the drawer, but all of a sudden, she froze on the spot. "This challenge token. What's wrong?" The male receptionist turned his gaze over as well, and in the next moment, his body stiffened as well. "There are actually golden marks on it. Isn't that a sign that he has cleared the trial?" Speaking up to this point, the male receptionist traded gazes with Qingyu, and the both of them gulped down a mouthful of saliva in shock. It can't be that he managed to clear the Bing corridor? As receptionists of the corridor of puppets, they were well aware of the difficulties surrounding the Bing corridor. Many geniuses of the Sanctum of Sages had marched in confidently, only to return with dispirited looks on their faces. There were years where not even a single challenger would manage to clear it successfully, and that leaving Aperture Realm primary stage fellow actually managed to clear it. How in the world was that possible? And if he had already cleared the trial, what about Senior Shui? Considering how she had entered the trial before him, why was she nowhere to be seen? "I'll head over to take a quick look." The bewildering situation left Qingyu feeling completely crazed. Unable to hold herself back anymore, she stood up from her seat and prepared to make her way over to Bing corridor to check the situation out. "Wait a moment." But before Qingyu could leave the area, the male receptionist beside her abruptly grabbed her hand. Perplexed, she turned around to look at the male receptionist, only to see the latter pointing at the area in front of him with eyes widened in disbelief. She traced the male receptionist's finger and looked over as well, and the sight she saw left her entire body freezing on the spot. The young man who had just left for the gooey corridor a moment ago had returned. With a brilliant smile on his face, he took out another 100 concentrated high-tier spirit stones along with a challenge token and passed those over to them. I wish to challenge the Ren corridor now. Despite her dazed state, Qingyu still managed to instinctively take out a challenge token from the drawer and passed it over to the young man before her. Thank you, the young man replied before turning around elegantly to take his leave. He managed to clear the gooey corridor too? Taking a glance at the challenge token which had just been returned, Qingyu's lips twitched once more. Even if the gooey corridor was easy, surely it should be impossible to clear it that quickly. How long had he been gone for? 1 minute. 2 minutes. In any case, it was not any more than 3 minutes. Within such a short period of time, even getting there and back would take 2.5 minutes, which meant to say that he only spent a couple of seconds to clear the gooey corridor. Trading gazes with the male receptionist, the both of them could see the horror in each other's eyes. Just as they were stunned with fright, the young man's voice sounded once more, sorry to interrupt, but I would like the challenge token for Shin Corridor. Thank you. While shuddering in fear, Qingyu passed a challenge token over before taking the other party's spirit stones and challenge token. Then, taking a glance at the challenge token once more, her body jolted. It was another pass. To clear both of them equally quickly, did this mean to say that the difficulty levels of both the gooey corridor and the Ren corridor were no different to him? She widened her mouth so wide that it almost seemed as if she was a fish that had fallen on shore. Just as she was about to check with the male receptionist to see if she was dreaming, the young man walked over once more. Give me the challenge token for the gang corridor. Qingyu. The male receptionist. Who? I'm finally done copying down all of it. By coupling this rippling water profound art with my current cultivation technique, I would surely be able to bring my fighting prowess up to a new level, Senior Shuei remarked with a satisfied smile. As soon as the young man left, she immediately started copying, and all in all, it took her 20 minutes in order to finish copying down the thick manual entirely. Of course, she would be able to memorize the entire book within a shorter period of time if she wanted to, but while cultivators of her caliber possessed a photographic memory, that didn't mean that their memories were infallible. Ultimately, it would still be safer to keep a physical copy of the manual. Even a word of difference for a cultivation technique as profound as this would result in a vast difference in its conception. She didn't want to take on this needless risk. She had spent an entire month challenging the Bing corridor, only to fail each time. If not for that young man she had encountered earlier, it was doubtful whether she would have been able to obtain the rippling water profound art or not. It wasn't easy for her to come by this opportunity, so it was best not to waste it. I wonder if he has finished clearing the gooey corridor yet. Given his strength, it should be a walk in the park for him. Placing the cultivation technique manual carefully back onto the shelf, Senior Shuei slowly made her way out of the room, returning back to the front reception. What's wrong? As soon as she arrived at the front reception, she immediately noticed that something was amiss. The boisterous and cheerful Qingyu from before was, at this moment, sitting on a chair with a completely dazed look, reminiscent of a lifeless zombie. Her eyes were staring blankly at the ground, as if someone had stolen her soul. The male receptionist beside her wasn't doing any better either. His mouth was wide open, as if his lower jaw had been dislocated. Qingyu. What's wrong with the two of you? Senior Shuei asked out of worry. Senior Shuei, you are finally back. Some spirit finally returned back to Qingyu as she raised her head up slowly. Then, she anxiously stood up and asked, there was a young man named Zhongxian who entered the Bing corridor right after you, right? Did he really clear the trial? He did. His strength is truly extraordinary. Senior Shuei replied. After a 20 minutes rest or so, she had mostly recovered from her exertion. While her complexion still looked unnaturally pale, she was in a much better state than before. It seems like all of that really isn't a dream then. With a pale face, Qingyu staggered back onto her chair. Her hand opened up, and voila! A bunch of small tokens fell all over the ground. These are. Perplexed, Senior Shui bent down to pick up one of those small tokens, and her eyes widened in shock. These are all challenge tokens. Furthermore cleared. After an entire month of challenging the corridor of puppets, she had come to know what the golden marks on the challenge token represented. But why would there suddenly be so many cleared challenge tokens here? That's right. These are the doing of Zhongshe. Qingyu nodded in a daze. You mean to say that he cleared all of these trials? Senior Shui could hardly believe what she was saying. She quickly picked up all of the challenge tokens with a sweep of her zhenqi and examined all of them closely. Gui Corridor, Ren Corridor, Xin Corridor, Gung Corridor, Ji Corridor, Wu Corridor, Yi Corridor. He cleared so many of them. Senior Shui's body began trembling uncontrollably. In the short 20 minutes that she spent copying down her rippling water profound art, the other party actually cleared 7 corridors. How could he possibly do it so quickly? Fighting so many puppets in succession, wouldn't he run out of zhenqi? Wouldn't he feel exhausted? That's right. He cleared all of those without taking a breather at all. Qingyu nodded. Then, where is he at the moment? Senior Shui asked. He's currently challenging the Jiao corridor. Qingyu replied. The Jiao corridor? Senior Shui hurriedly lowered her head to take a look, and indeed, there was no Jiao corridor amongst challenge tokens. In other words, the young man hadn't cleared the hardest corridor yet. Wait, that's not right. Since he has already cleared the Bing and Yi corridors, why didn't he challenge the Ding corridor? Flipping through the challenge tokens once more, Senior Shui frowned in bewilderment. That fellow had started from the Gui corridor, and he had challenged every single corridor from the bottom up. So why would he skip the Ding corridor? Ah! Qingyu's face flushed red, and after a long moment of silence, she swallowed a mouthful of saliva and finally spoke up. He said that the name of the corridor didn't sound nice, and as an upright man, there was no point challenging it. Senior Shui. Bing corridor is the 3rd most difficult corridor, whereas the Ding corridor is the 4th most difficult corridor. Gui corridor is the 10th corridor, as well as the easiest one. Ren corridor is the 9th corridor, as well as the 2nd weakest one. Xin corridor is the 8th most difficult corridor. Basically, the 10th to the 5th, and 2nd most difficult corridors. The 1st and most difficult corridor. Zhongxian has already cleared the 2nd and 3rd hardest corridor, but he skipped the 4th hardest one. The character for Ding used here, in modern-day slang, has the meaning of a male reproductive organ. Chapter 1320 Challenging the Jiao Corridor, Jeji. Standing at the very center of the room, Zhongxian watched as a puppet walked out from a door ahead of him, and he heaved a deep sigh of helplessness. He had already cleared 8 of the 10 leaving Aperture Realm corridor of puppets, but he was still unable to compile a complete Heaven's Path divine art. Left with no choice, he could only head over here to challenge the most difficult trial of all. In the long several dozen millennium years of history behind the Sanctum of Sages, only 7 people had cleared the trial in total. From this, it wasn't too difficult to imagine how difficult the trial was. The puppet in the Yi corridor has already reached Grand Dominion Realm intermediate stage, so the one in the Jiao corridor is bound to be even stronger. Zhongxian thought as he assessed the puppet before him with narrowed eyes. Challenging the Yi corridor had already posed a great challenge to him. He had to use the flaws he had found in the puppet from the library of Heaven's Path and the keen discernment of his Eye of Insight in order to design a whole series of maneuvers before he was finally able to corner the puppet and subdue it. But even so, he still suffered some injuries in the midst of the challenge. It was fortunate that he was able to recover swiftly through his Heaven's Path zhenqi, or else he might have to retire for the day. According to what the female receptionist, Qingyu, has said, Ruoxin has cleared the Jiao corridor. So, the least I can do is to clear it as well, Zhongxian thought determinedly as a powerful fighting spirit flowed forth from him. Of the 7 people who had cleared the Jiao corridor, Luo Ruoxin was one of them. Since his girlfriend was able to clear it, he mustn't lose out either. Otherwise, how could he be qualified to ask for her marriage in hand? After walking out from the door, the puppet abruptly opened its eyes and announced grandly, to dare to challenge the Jiao corridor, you must be really confident in your strength. Very well, Let me see what you are capable of then. You are able to speak. Zhongxian frowned in bewilderment. Even the puppet he had modified earlier in the Bing corridor was only capable of muttering a couple of incoherent syllables. Yet, the puppet before him was actually capable of voicing human speech. This was inconceivable. Let's begin the battle. Couldn't even be bothered to waste its breath on words anymore, the puppet uttered coldly before charging forward. Who? Its movements were as swift as a bolt of lightning, and it took only an instant for it to appear before Zhongxian. On the other hand, Zhongxian didn't expect the puppet to move so quickly, covering the 10 meters between them instantaneously as if teleportation. He quickly took a step forward as well to build up some momentum as he thrust his palm toward the puppet. In an instant, countless palm prints materialized all over the area, as if a garden of resplendent flowers had blossomed in the midst of the battlefield all of a sudden. They converged with one another to form a seemingly relentless current of force that threatened to wear down any opponent. This was a battle technique he had obtained from the Yi corridor, overlapping palm. This palm art worked in a manner strikingly similar to the 1,000 hands of Rulai. Its prowess would stack up layer after layer on one another, leaving one feeling as if one would be washed by its might. While this attack wasn't as powerful as the heavenly demon Great Sorrow Palm in terms of offensive, it was an excellent move when used in defensive maneuvers. More importantly, due to how complex the technique was, it was extremely difficult to distinguish real threats from feints, thus possibly creating unexpected results in battle. Hong Long. But while Zhongxian's palm strike was formidable, the puppet was even stronger. Using some sort of bizarre battle technique, the sheer might of its fist seemed to seal the surrounding space completely, preventing the countless palms from converging with one another, thus rendering it completely ineffective. The puppet has cultivated overlapping palms too. Zhongxian frowned in realization. To be able to make such instantaneous judgment to effectively neutralize his attacks, there could only be one possibility. The puppet must have a deep understanding of overlapping palms as well, and it knew the ideal moments to strike in order to nerf the offense. While Zhongxian did improve the palm strike significantly through compiling it with various other palm art manuals in the Library of Heaven's Path, those who were familiar in the technique would still be able to find an opportunity to step in and counterattack. This wasn't about exploiting the flaws in the palm technique, but simply the natural manner how the certain maneuvers would curb one another. Break. Knowing that he would only be placed in a deeply disadvantageous position if he were to continue pushing his overlapping palms on, he decisively changed his palm strike into a sword art instead. With a flick of his finger, a powerful surge of sword chi burst forth. Having comprehended sword quintessence, every single movement that Zhongxian made could be considered as a sword art. Even though he didn't execute any battle techniques, he could exert at will was still not beneath any ordinary sword art. Pu. The sword chi instantaneously sliced through the space which the puppet had constructed and flew straight for the latter's glabella. In face of the swift transformations in Zhongxian's attacks, it harumphed coldly. Without the slightest hint of panic, it calmly opened up its tightly clenched fist like a blossoming orchid, and several surges of sword chi shot forth from it. Po! 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 The sword chi collided with one another, causing a resounding explosion in the air before vanishing simultaneously. The clash in sword chi left Zhongxian with suffocating sensation welling up in his chest. It seemed the backlash of the collision had caused some internal injuries to him. Sword quintessence. A puppet actually managed to achieve the level of sword quintessence. He had known that the puppet of the Jiao corridor would be formidable, but he didn't think that the latter would be such a powerful opponent. It was one thing for it to have grasped the overlapping palms, but to actually possess such a deep comprehension of swordsmanship as well, achieving the level of sword quintessence. This was really unbelievable. From how Zhong Jiuxiao was able to rely on his half-quintessence comprehension of swordsmanship and his shallow understanding of the three swords of Lingshu to get into the Sanctum of Sages, it could be seen how rare top sword practitioners were. For a puppet to actually wield such deep understanding of swordsmanship as well, it would have been a lie if he were to say that he wasn't astounded. Wait a moment, it's impossible for a puppet to comprehend sword quintessence by itself. Its innate flaws render it incapable of comprehending such conceptualizations. From the looks of it, it appears that an expert sword practitioner who has comprehended true quintessence had infused a part of himself into the puppet's body, thus granting it the ability to execute such a powerful sword chi. A moment after his shock, Zhongxian swiftly realized that something was amiss with the situation. Puppets weren't capable of cultivation or comprehension unless under certain unique circumstances. They could fight on command, but every single moves they made would be programmed beforehand. In other words, the sword quintessence which the puppet had displayed wasn't its own comprehension but merely a fragment of memory of a sword expert. In other words, even though the puppets were capable of executing moves that wielded the prowess of sword quintessence, its failure to grasp the fundamental principles behind it would limit the flexibility of its moves. But even if that was the case, it still wouldn't be easy to deal with the puppet. It'll be difficult for me to outmaneuver the puppet in terms of swordsmanship since it has grasped sword quintessence and wields far greater strength and speed than me, and in terms of palm arts, I'm not an opponent for it either. Zhongxian's mind swiftly whirred into action. If the puppet was still of equivalent cultivation realm as Zhongxian, he might still have been able to outmaneuver it in terms of swordsmanship with time, but the vast disparity in their fundamental abilities would make it nigh impossible to do so. Also, in the previous clash using his overlapping palms, the puppet had displayed prowess far above his. How in the world was he supposed to win this battle? The odds were overwhelmingly against his favor. Dominion. A light sphere of roughly a meter radius appeared around Zhongxian's body. It seemed like there was no other choice than to use his ultimate skill then, Wang. But before Zhongxian could make any move with his dominion, he suddenly felt the surrounding space crushing heavily down upon him. The puppet had released its dominion as well. Astonishingly, the puppet's dominion was 20 meters in radius, and just by standing in its perimeter, Zhongxian felt as if steel chains were wrapped tightly around his body, rendering it impossible for him to move even a single inch. This is Grand Dominion Realm Pinnacle? Zhongxian's lips twitched in frenzy. It was no wonder why every single move he executed was neutralized so easily. The puppet's cultivation had already reached Grand Dominion Realm Pinnacle. Currently, Zhongxian wielded the strength to subdue a Grand Dominion Realm primary stage cultivator without any problem, perhaps a little strenuous against intermediate stage cultivators but definitely still possible to achieve victory, but against advanced stage and pinnacle experts. He barely stood a chance at all. Who? With cold sweat breaking throughout Zhongxian's body, he immediately executed the unbounded Voyager and forcefully escaped from the shackle-like restraints of the puppet's dominion to a corner of the room. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he took out the challenge token and crushed it. Wang. An aura rippled from the token, and the puppet who was just about to charge toward Zhongxian once more immediately halted its attacks. It took a few steps back before asking coldly, "Are you admitting defeat?" Despite how intricacies behind their exchange of blows, in truth, the three moves that they had traded, a fist art, a sword art, and dominion, lasted less than 3 breaths in total. Considering how they had barely explored the depths of each other's strength yet, it seemed a little too early to be admitting defeat at this point. "I'm no match for you in my current state." Zhongxian shook his head helplessly. In the first place, this trial was designed for leaving Aperture Realm Pinnacle experts, whereas he was only at leaving Aperture Realm primary stage. To be honest, it was not entirely impossible for him to emerge victorious if he were to utilize all of the means at his disposal, but the circumstances hadn't grown so desperate for him that necessitated such a course of action yet. Farewell. Zhongxian turned around unhesitatingly and left the room. But without clearing the Jiao corridor, I won't be able to compile out a perfect leaving Aperture Realm Heaven's Path divine art to cultivate. It's almost like a paradox. It seems like I'll just have to find other alternative methods to raise my fighting prowess then. Zhongxian thought as he made his way over to the front reception. Currently, the greatest room of improvement for me should lie in the 3 swords of Lingshu and the divine eyes of the 9th netherworld. There were 2 direct ways of raising one's fighting prowess. First, through raising one's cultivation, and second, through cultivating formidable battle techniques. He wouldn't be able to advance his cultivation without compiling the complete leaving Aperture Realm Heaven's Path divine art, so it seemed like he could only pursue the second route. He had 2 extremely powerful battle techniques at hand, and the successful cultivation of any of them would raise his fighting prowess immensely. However, it was a pity that they were terribly flawed, which was why he had put off cultivating them up to date. I should ask around to see where I can find sword art manuals, Zhong Xian thought as he arrived before the front reception. Zhong Shi, did you clear the Jiao corridor? Senior Shui had been lingering around the area out of curiosity, and she immediately spoke up in agitation as soon she saw Zhong Xian. I didn't. Zhong Xian shook his head. The puppet in the Jiao corridor is simply too powerful. I'm still unable to match it with my current strength. I see. Senior Shui instinctively heaved a sigh of relief, but after realizing the rudeness of her action, her face immediately reddened in a fluster. It was already unbelievable how the young man had managed to clear 8 of the corridors successively without any rest, and if he could clear the Jiao corridor as well, she might have really been scared out of her wits. Excuse me, do you know where I can learn sword arts in the Sanctum of Sages? Paying no heed to Senior Shui's actions, Zhong Xian passed the challenge token back to Qingyu as he asked. You wish to learn swordsmanship? Before Qingyu could reply, Senior Shui had already interjected with a frown. That's right. Zhong Xian nodded. If you intend to learn swordsmanship, you are in luck. Senior Shui over here happens to be the most formidable sword practitioner amongst the younger generation in the Sanctum of Sages, and her teacher is the most powerful swordmaster around here, Qingyu said. You are a sword practitioner? Taken aback, Zhong Xian turned his sight to Senior Shui. Back at the Bing corridor, the young lady had used all kinds of battle techniques and secret arts to deal with the puppets, but sword art wasn't one of them. Of course. Hearing those words of skepticism, Senior Shui frowned in displeasure. With a flick of her wrist, she whipped out a sword and said, Why? Do you want to try my swordsmanship? The usage of weapons and artifacts were banned in the corridor of puppets, and the lack of a sword would have severely limited the might of her swordsmanship, so she decided against using it altogether in the battle. However, this didn't mean that she would allow others to question her accomplishment in swordsmanship. She raised her sword up, and concentrated sword intent burst forth from her. Not too bad, but there's still room for improvement. Seeing that Senior Shui had achieved the level of upper sword heart, Zhong Xian offered a few rare words of compliment. If it isn't too much trouble, may I ask you to lead me to where sword art manuals are stored? There's still room for improvement. Let me see how deep of an understanding you have in swordsmanship then. With a cold harumph, Senior Shui's body seemed to warp into a sharp sword as she charged forward with imposing momentum. Paji. But before she could even come close to Zhong Xian, the sword she was wielding suddenly dragged her entire body down to the ground, shaking uncontrollably in her hand. Yi corridor is the second most difficult corridor, whereas Jiao is the most difficult corridor. Rulai palm is a series of technique that originated from a Hong Kong television show back in 1964, and it has become quite a popular technique that permeated many films and works afterward, most notably, Kung Fu Hustle. The picture looks a little shabby, but it looks something like this, https://GSS3. BD static. com7po3dsag_114khgkpowk1hf6hhy bake w%3d268% 3bg% 3d0 sign equals 21D1E957C8 1B9D16777F C9347B722777F C934B722E38 1F30E924FC52. Chapter 1321 Unless you are the Sanctum Head, you. Struggling up from the ground, Senior Shui's lips were twitching crazily. The gaze she directed at the young man before her had changed altogether. Your comprehension of swordsmanship has already reached the level of sword quintessence. As a genius in swordsmanship, she was well aware of the various levels in swordsmanship. Her sword had dropped to the ground in fear before it could even nick the young man at all, trembling non-stop. She had only encountered such a situation with her teacher before. In other words, the young man who appeared to be in his early 20s already possessed an understanding of swordsmanship that was on par with her teacher. But how in the world could that be? To achieve sword quintessence required not only an extremely deep understanding of swordsmanship. More than that, one also had to accumulate sufficient experience and insight before one would be able to achieve the conceptualization necessary for the realm. The reason her teacher was able to achieve that realm was because he had once traveled a distance of 10,000 li on foot, experiencing the suffering and agony that ordinary mortals underwent, and that was what became the foundation for his breakthrough. Even if the young man were to start cultivating from his mother's womb, that would only be a short 20 years. To achieve sword quintessence within this limited period of time was truly inconceivable. Zhongxian did not deny the matter. Instead, with a flick of his wrist, the sword that was bowing to him was released from its pressure. Wang! It flew into the air and landed in his hands. He flicked it lightly, and a crisp metallic reverberation echoed from it. "This sword is not bad. It's compatible with you," Zhongxian remarked before tossing the sword back. The sword was light and flexible, which was well suited for a water attribute cultivator like Senior Shui. "My teacher picked it out for me," Senior Shui replied as she stored her sword. Following which, she turned to look at Zhongxian and asked, "You said that you wished to browse through books relating to swordsmanship." Since the young man had comprehended sword quintessence, there was no point in challenging him in a duel anymore. The disparity between them was simply too big, so she would only be humiliated in the end. "My teacher has quite a vast collection of books relating to swordsmanship, and I can bring you over," Senior Shui said hesitantly. Hearing those words, Zhongxian's eyes lit up. "Ah, then I'll be troubling you to lead the way then." "However," Senior Shui said, "I should warn you first. You have already comprehended sword quintessence, which means that you have already found your own way, so it would be best for you not to harbor too much hope regarding the matter. I think that there's a good chance that you may be kicked out before you can see any books." "Kicked out? Why?" Zhongxian frowned in confusion. To achieve the level of sword quintessence at his age, he could already be considered an outstanding genius. Most sword practitioners would welcome him with opened arms, wanting to trade insights with him, so why would he be kicked out instead? As you may know, my teacher is the #1 sword expert in the Sanctum of Sages, Zhen Qinsheng. He possesses exceptionally powerful cultivation, and is an extremely respectable man as well. At this point, Senior Shui paused for a moment before continuing with a suppressed voice. "Just that, he tends to be a little too rigid and inflexible when it comes to rules." "Inflexible when it comes to rules?" Zhongxian frowned. As Zhen Qinsheng's student, Senior Shui was not in a good position to criticize her teacher, but basically, what her words meant was that Zhen Qinsheng was an austere person, possessing the attitude reminiscent of an old academic. Such people tended to be extremely forthright in their words and actions. If they harbored goodwill for you, they would treat you with the utmost sincerity and offer their assistance magnanimously. However, if they found that they could not get along with you, then no matter how high a standing you had, how illustrious a background you had, nothing would be able to change their view of you. Yes. He used to be an elder of the Hall of Propriety, so he regards rules and formalities very highly. If you want to browse through his collection of books and receive his guidance, you will have to clear his test and receive his acknowledgement. The Zhong clan has a genius sword practitioner known as Zhong Shu, and is a renowned figure even in the inner sanctum. In terms of swordsmanship, he's reputed to be the indisputable #1, having achieved the level of sword quintessence. Yet, when he paid my teacher a visit in hopes of browsing through his collection of books, he was still mercilessly kicked out. So, I thought that it would be good to give you a heads up so that you won't be shocked later on, Senior Shui said hesitantly. Even a sword quintessence expert was kicked out? Why? Zhongxian was perplexed. As someone who had comprehended sword quintessence, Zhong Shu could already be considered one of the top figures of the Sanctum of Sages, even though his cultivation was lacking compared to the elders. In a sense, he could even be considered a fellow peer of Zhen Qinsheng's in terms of swordsmanship. It simply did not seem rational for Zhen Qinsheng to kick Zhong Shu away on a whim. Like I have said before, my teacher is someone who regards formalities and the sort very highly. The person that he respects the most is the third sanctum head. The third sanctum head was one of the rare few who trod the path of cultivation through his sword, standing unchallenged in the world through his profound comprehension of swordsmanship. Those of the sage clans had to defer to him, and even the elders of the master-teacher pavilion headquarters dared not face him head-on. In his generation, the prestige and strength of the Sanctum of Sages were pushed to the very peak. However, despite the overwhelming prowess of the third Sanctum head, it is a pity that he was slightly lacking when it came to his ability to impart knowledge. As a result, he was unable to pass down his full heritage, and it was then that the swordsmanship in the Sanctum of Sages began declining. My teacher is a descendant of the third Sanctum head, and over the years, he has been guarding the hint of sword intent left behind by the third Sanctum head. In order to become my teacher's student or learn anything from him, you have to gain the acknowledgement of the sword intent first. To be honest, I think the reason I was able to emerge among dozens of genius sword practitioners and become my teacher's student is mainly because of my water attribute. As you know, the water attribute's nature is to encompass everything. On the other hand, Zhongshu has already comprehended a path of swordsmanship belonging to himself, and it's at odds with the sword intent. As a result, my teacher kicked him out. I see. Zhongxian nodded in realization. Once one's comprehension of swordsmanship reached the level of sword quintessence, the sword intent one exerted would be able to gain some degree of consciousness. Given so, it was indeed possible for a sword intent to have the ability to choose a suitable successor to inherit its way. A different conceptualization of sword intent could result in a clash of ideology. Senior Shuei cultivated a water attribute cultivation technique, and due to its gentle and flexible nature, it was easier for her to receive the recognition of the sword intent. On the other hand, those who had a deeper comprehension of swordsmanship were likely to already have their own conceptualization of what swordsmanship should be like, and that meant it was highly likely that there would be a conflict of ideology with the sword intent, thus making it even more difficult for them to receive its recognition. A thought surfaced in Zhongxian's mind. Does this mean that the books that Jian Qinsheng has collected were all left behind by the third Sanctum head? In a sense, receiving the sword intent's recognition could also be interpreted as walking on a similar path of swordsmanship. Only those who walked a similar path would be able to browse through his books and receive his guidance. To put it plainly, Jian Qinsheng was simply looking to cultivate his own lineage of sword experts. Zhongxian shook his head. Every single person has a unique comprehension of swordsmanship, so I wonder what conceptualization Jian Qinsheng has comprehended. Chances are that it's different from the old sword maestros. His current comprehension of swordsmanship mostly originated from the old sword maestro. So far, he had never heard of anything between the old sword maestro and the third Sanctum head, so it was likely that the two of them were from different schools. In other words, if he headed over, there was a good chance that just like Zhongshu, he would be rejected by the sword intent and kicked out. After a moment of dilemma, Zhongxian could not help but ask, what if I just take a look at the books from afar, not copying or scanning them with my spiritual perception? The way he read books was different from the others. As long as it was within his range of sight, he would be able to take anything into his library of Heaven's Path. He did not need Jian Qinsheng's guidance, notes from the books, or even access to see the content within at all. All he wanted was a look at them from afar. This should be fine, right? Take a look at the books from afar. Senior Shuei shook her head with a bitter smile. My teacher treasures every single one of those books dearly, and he created a room that only those who have his token in hand will be able to enter. So, unless you are the Sanctum head of the Sanctum of Sages, there's no way you will be able to get in. Surprised by that, Zhongxian asked, the Sanctum head will be able to get in? It seemed like he was the only candidate for the position of the Sanctum head at the moment. Well, he was not the Sanctum head, but it would not take too long before he inherited the position. Of course, the Sanctum head is the highest leader of the Sanctum of Sages. No matter who my teacher dares offend, he would never turn down a request from the Sanctum head, Senior Shuei replied matter-of-factly. A moment later, she shook her head and sighed. However, it has been more than 300 years since the Sanctum of Sages had a Sanctum head. Currently, all affairs are taken care of by the Deputy Sanctum head. Alright, there's no point discussing about such matters too much. We aren't in a position to talk much about someone as esteemed as the Sanctum head. So, after all I have said, Are you still interested in heading over to take a look? If that's the case, let's set off now. I still want to give it a try. Let's go. Zhongxian replied with a smile. Chapter 1322 Hierarchy among Sage Clans. While Zhongxian knew that Zhen Qinsheng's conceptualization of swordsmanship was bound to be different from his, he still felt compelled to head there to take a look. If, by some chance, he really managed to acquire the sword art manuals required to perfect the 3 swords of Lingshu, he would be able to clear the Jiao corridor and finally form his leaving Aperture Realm Heaven's Path divine art. Besides, every single cultivator had a unique interpretation of cultivation, forged by their individual experiences and insights. Only through interaction with others would one be able to broaden one's horizons and raise the ceiling for further improvement. Let's go. Seeing that the young man was still insistent on heading over, Senior Shui nodded. She bade farewell to Qing Yu, and the both of them made their way out of the Hall of Solidarity. While advancing forward, Senior Shui sent a telepathic message to Zhongxian. Later on, if you fail to gain the acknowledgement of the sword intent and my teacher asks you to leave, I advise you to just turn around and walk away. Don't expect to be able to sway him with words, on the contrary, you will only be making things difficult on yourself. Those who live for their swordsmanship usually have a temperament similar to a sword, sharp and straightforward. Don't worry, I understand, Zhongxian replied with a nod. Those who were able to raise their comprehension of swordsmanship to the level of sword quintessence would have devoted their life, mind, soul, and spirit all to the sword, so naturally, their personality would also gradually morph into something resembling their swordsmanship as well. For this reason, sword practitioners tended to be true to their feelings, and they hated it when others beat around the bush. Taking the old sword maestro for example, he was extremely decisive in his actions. Even when he dissipated, he did it with absolute gusto, not showing the slightest hesitation. It's good that you understand. Senior Shui heaved a sigh of relief. Considering how the young man was able to wield such great strength and achieve such astounding accomplishment in swordsmanship at a young age, there was little doubt that he came from an extraordinary background. She did not wish for her goodwill to end up causing dissension on both sides. Thinking up to this point, Senior Shui could not help but turn to Zhongxian and ask curiously, "Your name is Zhongxian, right? Are you from the Zhong clan? Why haven't I heard of you before?" Seeing that someone was misunderstanding his identity yet again, Zhongxian shook his head. "I'm not from the Zhong clan." "You aren't?" Senior Shui could hardly believe what she was hearing. If he was not from the Zhong clan, did he manage to obtain such astounding strength at his age without relying on the power of a sage clan's bloodline? How could that be possible? "I am from the Qingyuan Empire, and I guess the reason I possess decent strength would be because I am extremely hardworking," Zhongxian explained earnestly. Recalling how the young man had just cleared 8 corridors in succession within 30 minutes and yet still chose to follow her to learn swordsmanship instead of taking a break, Senior Shui could not help but nod in agreement. To be able to wield such strength at your age despite being an unaffiliated cultivator, you do have some tenacity in you. Senior Shui, if I recall correctly, you tapped into the power of your bloodline earlier, right? Are you from a sage clan as well? Zhongxian asked curiously. You don't know me? Senior Shui nearly choked on her saliva. Her cultivation might only have been at leaving Aperture Realm Pinnacle, but due to her background and physical appearance, she could be said to be a celebrity in the outer sanctum, a person who would catch the eyes of others no matter where she went. And yet, this fellow actually did not know her background. Are you for real? Well, this is the first time I have seen you. Am I supposed to know who you are? Zhongxian asked with a perplexed frown. First time you are seeing me? Realization struck Senior Shui as she widened her eyes in astonishment. You can't be a freshman who has just enrolled into the Sanctum of Sages today, can you? I am. Zhongxian nodded. Right after you cleared the entrance examination, you ran straight to the Hall of Solidarity and cleared 8 corridors in succession. Senior Shui gulped as her cheeks began quivering non-stop. Is it just me, or are the freshmen nowadays a little too formidable? Even after an entire month of preparation, she was still having trouble clearing the Bing corridor, but barely after arriving in the Sanctum of Sages, That fellow had already cleared 8 of the corridors. Ah. After the entrance examination ended in the afternoon, I took a trip to the Hall of Erudition to take the 8-star formation master examination and successfully cleared it by setting up a grade 8 formation. After which, I chatted with someone for 2 hours before returning to my residence. Then, I took a bath before going over to the Hall of Solidarity, Zhongxian said. Senior Shui's body petrified on the spot. It was, by no means, easy to clear the 8-star formation master examination. Even the elder brother of the little princess of the Luo clan had challenged it twice, only to fail both times around. So, why was the young man talking about it with a light tone that seemed as if he had just taken a walk around the park? More importantly, most 7-star pinnacle formation masters would require at least a few months of hard work before they were able to set up a grade 8 formation. Considering that the entrance examination had ended in the afternoon, and at this very moment, the sky had not darkened yet. Are you a monster? Unable to hold herself back any longer, Senior Shui asked, if I may ask, how long did you take to clear the 8-star formation master examination? This. Zhongxian frowned as he tried to recall the entire course of events. If we exclude the strength assessment, roughly around 5 to 6 minutes. Well, if that elder Su hadn't dawdled, I should have been able to clear it faster. 5 to 6 minutes. Senior Shui's body began trembling wildly from frenzy. At this moment, she felt so traumatized that she did not know if she would ever recover from this blow. She had been wanting to take the 8-star formation master examination for a long time, too, but it was a pity that her cultivation was too low, so she was unable to receive the qualifications for it. Yet, even though the young man possessed cultivation beneath hers, he still managed to clear the examination in a few minutes. The more she thought about the matter, the more suffocated she felt on the inside, to the point where she could not catch her breath anymore. Seeing how the young lady's face was turning red at a moment and white in the other, clutching her chest at one moment and tearing at her hair in the other, she really looked mentally deranged. Knowing that it would be disrespectful to point that out, Zhongxian very conscientiously changed the topic. Right, you still haven't answered my question yet. Are you from a sage clan? Suppressing all of those overwhelming emotions inside her, Senior Shui Qianro replied, My name is Shui Qianro, and I come from a sage clan, the Shui clan. Shui clan? Zhongxian suddenly thought of something, and he lowered his head contemplatively for a moment before asking in bewilderment, I have a friend who is from the Mu clan, and he practices wood attribute cultivation techniques. Water and wood. Could it be that there are clans relating to the 5 elements among the sage clans? Mu Yuan, whom he had met in the Hongyuan Empire, was a member of the Mu clan. For a Shui clan to appear here, could there really be some kind of 5 elements clans among the sage clans? Otherwise, would it not be really coincidental for the Shui clan to practice water attribute cultivation techniques and the Mu clan to practice wood attribute cultivation techniques? The clans relating to the 5 elements are Tier 1 sage clans. You don't know this? Shui Qianro was really rendered speechless this time around. On top of being Tier 1 sage clans, the 5 elements clans had a history of being deeply united with one another, such that even the Zhong clan and the Luo clan had to think twice before getting on bad terms with them. As someone who had managed to get into the sanctum of sages, how could the young man have never heard of them? Do you live beneath a rock? But thinking about the matter once more, it was not like the matter was completely impossible. Despite being a conferred empire, the Qingyuan Empire was located extremely far away from the center of the master-teacher continent. Considering that, it was not too surprising that they were not well informed on the power structure of the sage clans. The summer worm would never come to know of ice, and the frog in the well would never understand the vastness of the sea. At this, Shui Qianro shook her head and began explaining. Sage clans are divided into various tiers. You should have at least heard of that, right? Yuan Zhongxian nodded. There were sage clans in the 8 conferred empires too, such as the clan that Xuening had come from. However, they were mostly Tier 3. Sage clans can be basically divided into 4 tiers. Standing at the top of the pyramid are the premier clans. While their standing pale in comparison to the Master-Teacher Pavilion headquarters, their standing surpasses that of the Apothecary Guild headquarters, blacksmith guild headquarters, and such. They wield immense authority and an exalted position in the master-teacher continent. All in all, there are 3 premier clans, namely the Zhong clan, the Luo clan, and the Jiang clan, Shui Qianrou explained. Beneath them are Tier 1 sage clans. The 5 elements clans such as the Shui clan and the Mu clan are listed in this category. Some of the stronger organizations in the master-teacher continent, despite not being sage clans, may also be placed in this category for comparison's sake, such as the Glacier Plain Court, Apothecary Guild, so on and so forth. Hearing those words, Zhong Xian widened his eyes in astonishment. All along, he had heard much about the strength of the Zhong clan and the Luo clan, and he knew that they were behemoths as well. However, he did not think that they would actually wield that much influence and power in the master-teacher continent, possessing a position that surpassed even that of the Apothecary Guild headquarters. It was no wonder Wu Shi and the others had been so worried when they learned that the person he liked was the little princess of the Luo clan. After that are the Tier 2 clans. These clans wield a position on par with the Empire Alliance, and overall, they number around 100. Last but not least, there are the Tier 3 clans, who wield influence equivalent to conferred empires. There are many of them spread across the entire master-teacher continent, such that I can't even give you a rough estimate as to how many of them there are. Shui Qianrou briefly went through the 4 different tiers of sage clans while Zhong Xian nodded along. The young lady had pretty much laid out everything clearly for him, albeit in a rather simplified way. It seemed like the sage clans obeyed a very strict hierarchy as well. At this point, Zhong Xian suddenly thought about Yuan Dao, and he could not help but ask, I have a Stu friend who is from the Yuan clan. May I know which tier the Yuan clan is in? Considering that the Glacier Plain Court was on par with Tier 1 sage clans, if the Yuan clan were to be beneath that, well, perhaps he should consider finding Yuan Dao and bringing him back. Seeing that Zhong Xian really did not know anything at all, Shui Qianrou shook her head helplessly and said, for the 5 elements clan, the Mu clan, Shui clan, and Jin clan have names that correspond directly to the element that they represent. On the other hand, the clan that represent fire has the surname Kai, and the clan that represents earth has the surname Yuan. As far as I know, there should be no other Yuan clan among the sage clans, so the friend that you spoke of should be a member of the 5 elements clan's Yuan clan. The Yuan clan represents earth of the 5 elements clans? So, it's a Tier 1 clan? Zhong Xian was slightly startled. To be honest, he really did not think that the Yuan clan would be so formidable. Indeed. Not only so, the Yuan clan is also known as the strongest of the 5 elements clans. They boast fearsome might and invincible defense, making them infallible berserkers of the battlefield. Shui Qianrou explained. The cultivation technique and bloodline ability passed down in the Shui clan had the ability to encompass everything, using flexibility and technique to curb overwhelming force with ease, but the problem with that was that their offensive prowess was too weak. Of the 5 elements clans, the clan that boasted the greatest offensive power was the Jin clan. However, if other factors were taken into account as well, the Yuan clan was the unquestionable number 1. I see. That's a relief. Hearing that the Yuan clan was not too weak, Zhong Xian heaved a sigh of relief. Since the Yuan clan had such a powerful heritage, he would not need to worry about Yuan Dao for the time being. A clan as powerful as that should have plenty of means to raise Yuan Dao's cultivation and fighting prowess swiftly. In fact, there was a chance that his cultivation might even be on par with Zhao Ya's. At this moment, Shui Qianrou suddenly sent a telepathic message over. Our teacher's residence is just ahead. Later on, try not to speak unless necessary. Raising his head, Zhong Xian realized that they had arrived before a rather stately-looking residence. Even before entering its premises, he could feel a powerful sword intent emanating from within, leaving him feeling as if he had returned to the Sword Lagoon. Is this where Elder Jian Qinsheng lives? Truly extraordinary, Zhong Xian remarked. As expected of the number 1 sword practitioner in the Sanctum of Sages. Despite comprehending sword quintessence, he still felt his sword intent being suppressed by the aura emanating from the residence, leaving him feeling slightly stifled on the inside. There's a surge of sword qi in the entrance that serves to keep ordinary students at bay. Give me a moment, I'll report your presence to my teacher so as to open up the path for you. Taking a deep breath, Shui Qianrou walked up to the residence, and just as she was about to enter, she suddenly noticed a sword qi thrashing around between the fingers of the young man beside her. The sword qi was struggling with all its might to escape, but as if clamped tightly between two steel bars, it was unable to free itself. Sword qi? Do you mean this? Zhong Xian was asked in bewilderment. Shui is the Chinese word for water, and Mu is the Chinese word for wood. Xuening is the guy who challenged Zhong Xian back in the Qianchong Empire with his golden silk thread, only to spin too much and vomit from vertigo. Mu wood, Shui water, Jin metal. Chapter 1323 All Wrong You. Goosebumps immediately rose all over Shui Qianrou's body, and she nearly lost all rationality. It was just a moment ago that she had reminded the young man to act with prudence so that he would not offend her teacher accidentally, and then he actually grabbed the surge of sword qi protecting the residence as soon as he arrived. Can't you just cool it down a little? Realizing his mistake as well, Zhong Xian hurriedly apologized. Pardon me. I'll release it right now. He had sensed the surge of sword qi as soon as he arrived by the entrance of the residence, and he had feared that it would accidentally harm Shui Qianrou, so he had secretly captured it. He did not think that it would actually be a doorkeeper left behind by Jian Qinsheng to fend off uninvited guest. In fear of the sharp sword qi, there would surely be no one who would dare mess around with it. This was as good as turning away all guests. Regardless of what Jian Qinsheng's intentions for leaving behind the sword qi were, that was not something for Zhong Xian to interfere with. As a guest, it was indeed rather inappropriate for him to have captured the doorkeeper. Thus, he swiftly released his grip on the sword qi. The struggling sword qi did not think that it would be released all of a sudden. Similar to a wild cat abruptly being released from its restraint, it whizzed uncontrollably outward. Su. The stone pillar propping up the entrance gate was immediately sliced apart. It fell to the ground, raising a cloud of dust. This. Zhong Xian was completely dumbfounded by the unexpected damage. All he had done was release the sword qi. How was he to know that the latter would be so unreliable, whizzing off to destroy the very place that it was supposed to guard? Still, to capture the other party's doorkeeper and indirectly result in the destruction of the gate, what would Jian Qinsheng think of him? But he really did not do it intentionally. Shui Qianrou's vision turned dark. She had reminded Zhong Xian time and time again to be careful, but it was as if her words had fallen on deaf ears. Now that he had caused such a huge commotion even before meeting her teacher. You are really putting me at a difficult position, do you know that? While Zhong Xian was still feeling deeply stifled by what had happened so far, a loud bellow suddenly sounded from the residence. Who is it? Following which, 8 men suddenly rushed out and encircled them. Senior Xie, it's me. Alarmed, Shui Qianrou swiftly stepped forward to calm down the situation. Junior Shui? What happened over here? Senior Xie frowned. Zhongshe over here has heard of our teacher's reputation, so he wanted to pay a visit to him. I forgot to warn him in advance about the sword qi, which resulted in this mishap, Shui Qianrou swiftly explained on Zhong Xian's behalf. Our teacher's sword qi is known for its incomparable sharpness. To not know of it in advance and yet remain unharmed in the face of it, even turning it against the gate instead, it seems like the friend you have over there is a skilled sword practitioner. Senior Xie's eyebrows shot up, and he began assessing Zhong Xian intently from head to toe. Senior Xie was a young man in his early 30s. He was dressed in a green robe, and with a sword in hand, he exuded a sharp and domineering aura. His cultivation had already reached Saint 6 Dan, Grand Dominion Realm Intermediate stage. I have only learned swordsmanship for a short moment and am lacking in skills, so I wasn't able to react in time when the sword qi appeared previously. I am sorry for the trouble I have caused. Zhong Xian swiftly spoke up, too. He had come with a favor in mind, so it would be best for him to maintain a humble attitude. Besides, he had not forgotten his motto of maintaining a low profile at all times yet. There's no need for any apologies here. The reason our teacher has left this surge of sword qi here is to assess the visitor's comprehension of swordsmanship. Only those who possess an innate sensitivity toward swordsmanship will be able to notice it in advance and avoid being harmed by it, Senior Xie replied with a hearty smile. All right, I'll bring you to meet our teacher. You'll bring me to meet your teacher? Zhongxian was stunned. Did he accidentally take the wrong script? In the past, when he accidentally caused some damage here and there, the other party would be convulsing all over, glaring at him with such hostility that he felt like he would combust under it. But this time around, no one was angry at him, and they were even inviting him to meet their teacher. Was this a trap? Were they afraid that he would run as soon as they talked about compensation, so they decided to first bring him into the heart of their base before extorting a fortune out of him? Or perhaps, was the demolition of the residence a part of Zhen Qinsheng's test for his visitors? Thinking back, most powerful experts had rather bizarre quirks of their own. Taking Sage Kuei for example, he was nothing but a fragmented soul now, and yet, he was still diligently whittling down that metal rod of his. Perhaps, demolition was the little quirk that the austere top swordmaster of Sanctum of Sages had? It would be wonderful if that was really the case. Zhongxian was confident that he would be able to score full brownie points from Zhen Qinsheng if so. Having guessed this much, Zhongxian turned to look at Shui Qianrou, wanting to see the answer from her face. However, the latter had a look of utter confusion on her face, which suggested that she was not aware that Zhen Qinsheng had such practices. Forget it. Regardless of whether it's a blessing or a disaster, I'll just have to deal with it when the time comes. After a moment of dilemma, Zhongxian heaved a deep sigh on the inside before he clasped his fist and directed a polite smile to Senior Xie. I'll be troubling you then. After which, he followed Senior Xie into the residence. Perhaps because it was located in the Sanctum of Sages, Zhen Qinsheng's residence was not too big. However, as if to make up for the lack of quantity with quality, it was exquisite. For starters, it was surrounded by a massive formation that allowed sword qi to flow freely on the inside. These surges of sword qi moved in accordance to some kind of a profound pattern, as if inviting sword practitioners to decipher its secrets. Such an environment would be highly effective in aiding sword practitioners in deepening their comprehension of swordsmanship, allowing them to improve by leaps and bounds within a short period of time. Secretly activating his eye of insight, Zhongxian studied the formation carefully and swiftly identified the locations of the formation flags and formation core. This way, if anyone were to dare make a move on him, he would be able to reduce the entire residence to rubble in an instant. This knowledge left Zhongxian feeling reassured inside, and he nodded in satisfaction. While Zhongxian was still examining his surroundings, Shui Qianrou discreetly walked to Senior Xie's side and asked through Zhenqi telepathy, Senior Xie, what's going on here? She was Zhen Qinsheng's disciple as well, and all along, she had known the sword qi guarding the residence to be a measure to prevent outsiders from barging in casually. When in the world did it become a test? Our teacher went to watch the earlier entrance examination, and he said that there are a few talented individuals among the new batch of freshmen who possess a profound understanding of swordsmanship. So, he altered the strength of the sword qi slightly, saying that those who are able to notice it in advance and remain unharmed in the face of it are those who possess great aptitude in swordsmanship. He tasked me with bringing anyone who manages to fulfill these two criteria to him. You didn't hear of the news because you left early in the morning, Senior Xie replied. The entrance examination was a huge affair in the Sanctum of Sages, and most elders would pay close attention to it in the hope of finding a suitable successor. As austere as Zhen Qinsheng was, it was his deepest wish to pass down his ancestors' swordsmanship, so he wanted to find a suitable successor to groom. I see. Coming to realize the situation, Shui Qianrou finally heaved a sigh of relief. All was fine as long as her teacher was not angry. Circling around a flower garden, a gazebo soon came into appearance. An elder was standing within the gazebo with a sword in hand, seemingly cultivating some kind of sword art. Our teacher is currently practicing his swordsmanship, so I'll have to ask you to wait here for a moment. Senior Xie waved his hand. All right. Zhongxian halted as he looked at the elder in the gazebo intently, interested to see what he was going to do. The elder's movements were extremely slow, but there was a distinct feeling of unbounded flexibility from it, a little reminiscent of the Taiji fist. Every single slash seemed to seal off an entire area of space, leaving those facing it with no way to escape from the attack. "What profound swordsmanship," Zhongxian remarked in awe. As one who had comprehended sword quintessence, Zhongxian could be considered as one who had reached the very pinnacle of swordsmanship. To the untrained eye, the elder's movement might seem to be nothing much, full of openings for one to exploit. However, with just a glance, Zhongxian could tell the extraordinary prowess of the sword art. Slow as it might have been, the elder's swordsmanship harnessed the very essence of swordsmanship in it. It actually bears some semblance of the Heaven's Path sword art. It was an indubitable fact that swordsmanship was valued for its flexibility and swiftness in movements, but it would be sheer foolishness to equate swiftness to strength. A swift sword wielded fearsome prowess, but if it was unable to strike the vitals of the opponent, it would merely be a waste of strength. Anyone could pick up a weapon and slash it wildly in quick succession. Such a maneuver would appear frightening, keeping most at bay. However, a true expert would be able to instantaneously see through the openings in the attacks and subdue the individual with a single strike. In a battle, swiftness was far from enough. Precision was of the utmost importance as well. The elder's swordsmanship was extremely slow, such that it would be more accurate to call it a performance than a real sword art, but every single movement of his was aligned with the essence of swordsmanship. Even the air seemed to tremble in resonance to his movements, sealing the entire space altogether. This bore a striking resemblance to his Heaven's Path sword art. It was the kind of swordsmanship that was completely devoid of excessive actions. As soon as the blade was drawn, it would surely strike a vital spot. It was due to this property that Zhongxian had been able to instill fear in the hearts of his opponent through his Heaven's Path sword art, and none of those in the same cultivation realm as him stood a chance against his swordsmanship. After the initial shock, Zhongxian soon shook his head. However, while it does bear a striking resemblance, it's still lacking a little. As similar as it was to the Heaven's Path sword art, it simply was not it. In swordsmanship, even the slightest of difference could create the greatest difference in result. If the elder were to face him with such swordsmanship, even if the elder wielded strength similar to the puppet in the Jiao corridor, Zhongxian would be able to defeat him easily. It was not to say that the elder's swordsmanship was weak, but the current sword art he was executing could be said to be a poor imitation of the Heaven's Path sword art. Every single move it made would simply be naturally curbed by the real Heaven's Path sword art, thus placing the elder in an absolutely disadvantageous position. Regardless of whether this sword art was created by him or the Third Sanctum head, the very fact that he could achieve this level of swordsmanship is a frightening feat in itself. Still, I can only say that it's a huge pity. Zhongxian sighed on the inside. The Heaven's Path sword art was created by compiling innumerable sword arts together, and it had already achieved the level of simplified profoundness. As an ordinary human, it was indeed incredible for the elder to have been able to come so close to comprehending the essence of swordsmanship. Who? While Zhongxian was still deep in thought, the elder in the gazebo finally halted his movements and retracted his sword. His aura felt as steady as a mountain, and his zhenqi swiftly retracted like the ebbing tide, making it impossible to discern anything extraordinary about him with the naked eye. If not for witnessing the wonders in his swordsmanship, Zhongxian might have thought of him as an ordinary old man. With a light smile, the elder turned to Zhongxian and asked, "This friend over here, I saw you shaking your head earlier. Is there something inappropriate with my swordsmanship?" "Inappropriate? That's not it." Zhongxian paused for a moment before continuing. "It would be more apt to say that it's completely wrong." Chapter 13:24 A strand of hair completely wrong? Shui Qianro was stunned for an instant before her face swiftly warped in horror. It felt like she had received enough shocks for a lifetime that day. She had already told the young man in advance to mind his words, and the latter had responded positively to her words. "Is this what you mean by being careful with your words?" Her teacher's swordsmanship was number one in the sanctum of sages. In fact, even when taking the entire master-teacher continent into account, he was definitely ranked amid those who stood at the zenith. In face of such a master, an ordinary man would not even dare breathe loudly, fearing that his actions would incur her teacher's wrath. Yet, this fellow actually said that his swordsmanship was completely wrong. Are you incapable of speaking properly? At the same time, Senior Xie's face also turned livid with anger. What did you say? Those words could be taken as a clear insult toward his teacher. He still had some respect for the young man in view of how he was able to discover and subdue the sword chi at the entrance, but who would have thought that he was just a person with his head in the clouds? Let him finish his words. The elder, Jian Qinsheng, waved his hand before turning his gaze to Zhongxian. This sword art was passed down to me from my ancestor, and it was with this sword art that he rose to the very peak of the master-teacher continent. It would be an exaggeration to say that he was infallible, but there was hardly anyone who was a match for him then. So, why would you say that this sword art is completely wrong? Well, Zhongxian pondered for a moment, but he soon realized that there were so many flaws that he did not know where he should start from. If he were to start listing all of them, he was afraid that the elder might just lose all confidence in his swordsmanship. Thus, he could only sigh and say, there are simply too many of them. I don't know how I should put it. You don't know how you should put it. Shui Qianrou's fists were so tightly clenched together that her fingernails were sinking into her flesh. If you don't know how you should put it, why don't you consider not speaking at all? Are you really not afraid of death, or are you just tired of living? Overwhelmed with rage, Senior Xie stepped forward and bellowed, arrogant fellow. Do you really think that you will be able to impress my teacher by spouting such nonsense over here? On the other hand, Jian Qinsheng frowned upon hearing Zhongxian's words. As one of the most esteemed sword masters throughout the master-teacher continent, there were countless young talents who wished to come under his tutelage. However, due to his severe demands when selecting his disciples, only a rare few were accepted. Perhaps in an attempt to stand out from the others, there were those who would utter arrogant words before him each year in hopes of catching his attention. It was a pity that their arrogance would be proven empty after a quick test. However, on top of wielding top-notch swordsmanship, Jian Qinsheng was an 8-star high-tier master teacher as well, possessing a superior eye of discernment. When the young man before him spoke those words earlier, there were no unnatural fluctuations in his voice, and his aura remained steady throughout. This was a sign of conviction, meaning to say that he had confidence in what he was saying. This was in stark contrast to the hint of anxiety and apprehension he had sensed from the previous students who had dared speak arrogantly before him. For this, rather than being angered by the young man's words, he was intrigued. He wanted to get to the bottom of the matter. Senior Xie clasped his fist and said, Teacher, please permit me to challenge that arrogant fellow to a duel and assess his swordsmanship. If his words prove to be empty, I wish to teach him a lesson so that he will learn some humility. How could he stand idly when someone was doubting his own teacher? As a student, it was his obligation to uphold his teacher's reputation and honor. Instead of replying to Senior Xie's request, Jian Qinsheng turned to Zhongxian and asked, You are a freshman, right? Yes, I am, Zhongxian replied with an attitude that appeared neither subservient nor arrogant. UN. Among the freshmen, there's a student who possesses exceptional swordsmanship. His name is Zhong Zhouxiao. Could you be him? Jian Qinsheng asked. He had watched the entrance examination, and he had seen that Zhong Zhouxiao had achieved the level of half-quintessence in swordsmanship despite his young age. There was no doubt that he harnessed boundless potential within him. Could the young man before him possibly be Zhong Zhouxiao? Zhouxiao is a friend of mine. At this point, Zhongxian bowed slightly before continuing. I am Zhongxian. Zhongxian? Jian Qinsheng pondered for a moment before shaking his head. Throughout the entrance examination, he had only been keeping an eye out for those who possessed exceptional talent in swordsmanship. While Zhongxian did cause a huge commotion when he rose to the top 50 in the final moment, to Jian Qinsheng, that was nothing worthy of note at all. You said that my sword art is completely wrong, but when I asked you about it, you aren't able to say anything either. Since that's the case, why don't you have a duel with my student? I'll have him suppress his cultivation to your level. Of course, the both of you will compete only in terms of swordsmanship, and it'll be a friendly duel, Jian Qinsheng proposed. Since the other party was not Zhong Zhouxiao, it was likely that his comprehension of swordsmanship was not too deep either. Thus, He decided to have his student try the other party out so as to see just what gave him the confidence to utter such brazen words. Sure, I'm fine with it. Zhong Xian nodded. Since he was unable to voice the flaws, it would be good if he could demonstrate it to the other party instead. Perhaps, he might be able to give the other party some insights regarding it. Follow me. Hearing that the young man had agreed to the duel, Senior Xie harumphed coldly before leading the way forward. A moment later, they arrived at an empty clearing not too far away from the gazebo. It was around 20 meters in diameter, a decent size to hold a battle. Voila! After taking his position in the clearing, Senior Xie slowly drew his sword. The instant that his sword left its sheath, the air around him immediately changed. It felt sharp and dangerous, reminiscent of a dagger that would plunge right into one's body at any moment. Jeji. Even though he had suppressed his cultivation down to primordial spirit realm primary stage, Senior Xie still carried an imposing presence that made him tower over others. Upper sword heart. With just a look, Zhong Xian was able to tell that Senior Xie had already achieved the level of upper sword heart, just a step away from achieving a breakthrough. To be able to achieve such a level of mastery in his swordsmanship at his age, even if he was still slightly lacking compared to Zhong Zhouxiao, he could already be considered an expert. Channeling his spirit and mind to the peak, Senior Xie gazed at Zhong Xian coldly. Where's your sword? Make your move. My sword. Zhong Xian shook his head. Considering that he was dealing with someone of his cultivation realm, and his comprehension of swordsmanship had already reached sword quintessence, he would really be bullying the other party if he wielded a sword. Thus, he quickly took a look at the surroundings before his eyes finally fell upon Shui Qianrou. If it's not too much trouble, I would like to borrow something from you, Senior Shui. You want to borrow something from me? Shui Qianrou was bewildered by that abrupt request for a moment before realization struck her. She flicked her wrist and passed her sword over. Here. Given how the young man had examined her sword previously, he must have been thinking of borrowing it from her. Typically speaking, due to the presence of a spirit within the sword, it would be difficult to borrow the sword of another. However, given that the young man had achieved sword quintessence, that should not be a problem. That's not what I mean. Instead of taking the sword, Zhong Xian walked up to Shui Qianrou, and with a light pinch, a strand of hair from the young lady fell into his palm. I don't need the sword. I'll just borrow a hair. After saying those words, he infused Zhenqi into the strand of hair. Wang. The hair immediately stood up as if a rapier. Returning to the clearing, Zhong Xian said with a smile, let's begin. You are going to use that against me? Senior Xie's eyes reddened in rage as his body trembled non-stop. He was one of the top sword practitioners among the student populace in the Sanctum of Sages, not to mention, the student of Swordmaster Jian Qinsheng. It was already beneath his standing to challenge a mere freshman, and yet, that fellow actually wanted to face him with a single strand of hair. That was a blatant show of derision toward him. Yuan. I don't have a hobby of bullying others. Zhong Xian nodded calmly. Now you're asking for it. Rage consumed his rationality as Senior Xie whipped his sword through the air with a piercing shrill. The difference between a professional and an amateur would clearly show as soon as they made a move. Even though Senior Xie was clearly in an enraged state, he did not allow it to affect his swordsmanship at all. As soon as he made a move, he had already sealed 8 of Zhong Xian's acupoints with his sword qi, sealing the major Zhenqi circulation pathway associated with most sword arts. That fellow's rage is faked. Zhong Xian noted with a nod of approval. There was truly no one mediocre among the students of the Sanctum of Sages. Despite appearing to be incomparably angry on the surface, appearing as if he would explode at any moment, Zhong Xian realized that Senior Xie was actually analyzing his posture and movements with absolute calmness, and the maneuvers he had executed were also calculated precisely to seal off his escape routes. Were the one facing this attack another upper sword heart expert or even Zhong Zhouxiao, they would surely be sent into a fluster, forced to face him head-on. But if Zhong Xian were to do that, the hair in his hand would surely be destroyed by the force from the collision. With his weapon destroyed at the very first encounter, that would signal the end of this sword duel. Forcing others to go on the defensive with a single strike, sword experts really should not be underestimated. However, It was a pity that the opponent Senior Xie was facing was an expert who had comprehended sword quintessence. With a light smile, Zhongxian did not bother to retreat or sidestep. Instead, with a leisurely diagonal pierce, he aimed for Senior Xie's shoulder. To most, it would be hard to understand why he would ignore the blade that was swiftly falling upon him and launch an offense on the opponent's shoulder instead. However, upon seeing this sight, a deep frown appeared between Jian Qinsheng's eyebrows, and a look of disbelief surfaced in his eyes. That was one of the moves he had executed earlier in the gazebo. Just that, the young man had managed to make it even more ingenious and fluid. The very movement seemed to naturally harmonize with the world, granting it compelling might. He had only made slight changes in the movement here and there, but the prowess he is able to bring forth is at a whole new level. Jian Qinsheng clenched his fists tightly in agitation. As a renowned sword master on the master-teacher continent, his eye for swordsmanship was irrefutable. The young man's movements appeared to be naively simple, but the crux to it lay in its impeccable timing to overwhelm the enemy's swordsmanship. Through it, even a strand of hair could display might on par with a sword. At this moment, Senior Xie's face also warped in astonishment. As soon as the young man made a move, he immediately felt his zhenqi circulation pathway being severed, and as if his chest had been clawed apart, intense pangs of pain assaulted him. Damn it! With reddened eyes, Senior Xie swiftly retracted his attack and began flitting around the clearing. He was intending on launching a forceful attack to capitalize on the strength of his sword to sever the young man's hair strand. However, after his initial plan fell apart, he decided to take a more careful approach, flitting around the battlefield in wait for a suitable opportunity to take the young man down in a single move. It was only a brief encounter, but it had eroded all disdain he had for the young man before him. He realized that the young man's comprehension of swordsmanship was not beneath his. On the other hand, the various juniors who had gathered in the area to spectate Senior Xie's duel were confused as to why Senior Xie would take a defensive position right after a single clash, and perplexed murmurs could be heard among them. Even Xue Qianrou was completely bewildered by the situation as well. While Jian Qinsheng was able to sense the ingenuity behind Zhongxian's move, his disciples were limited by their own understanding of swordsmanship and could not see through it. As a result, it appeared to them that Senior Xie was intentionally going easy on the young man. Senior Xie is simply too kind. Indeed. If it was me, I would have that fellow sliced apart in a heartbeat. Don't worry. Since Senior Xie has proposed the duel, he will definitely make that young man deeply regret his earlier arrogance. Such whispers could be vaguely heard in the area. Zhongxian heard those whispers, too, but he shrugged them off with a light chuckle. He had to admit that Senior Xie was sharper and more flexible than he had thought. The latter seemed to have realized that his shoulder pierce was not as simple as it looked. The timing and trajectory of the motion allowed for countless transformations that would allow him to easily suppress anything that the latter could have thrown at him, so he decisively withdrew his attack, opting to bide his time and wait for an opening. But how could the Heaven's Path sword art be avoided just by moving around the area? Holding the strand of hair tightly, Zhongxian used the very same move to launch another diagonal pierce. This time, the hair strand was not aimed for Senior Xie's shoulder but his throat. Once again, it looked like a simple maneuver, but due to its impeccable timing, it allowed for countless transformations. No matter how Senior Xie tried to evade, Zhongxian had plenty of ways to drag him back into the center of the attack, as if he was trapped in an inescapable whirlpool. In other words, there was no way to avoid it at all. The same move, but due to a slight difference in the trajectory of attack and timing, there was a manyfold difference in terms of prowess. It was difficult to believe that something like this could be possible even when witnessing it with one's own eyes. There's actually such a transformation to the move as well. By the side, Jian Qinsheng widened his eyes in shock, not daring to believe what he was seeing. Chapter 1325. A strand to shatter the sword. Having devoted many years of his life to uncovering the secrets behind his ancestors' swordsmanship, Jian Qinsheng was already well versed in all the different transformations in the swordsmanship. The move that Zhongxian had executed earlier consisted of 18 different types of transformations, but there were none that were an attack from this angle. A simple pierce it might have been, but it was indubitably a masterful stroke, cornering the opponent in a single move. Jian Qinsheng could not believe his eyes. But to do this, one must have an absolute grasp over the timing of the battle and the maneuvers of the opponent. Even I would require a lengthy period of contemplation before I could think of something like that, and to do so during a tense battle, where life and death hinge on the slightest millimeter of difference. Even he would struggle to execute such a movement in battle. While Jian Qinsheng was stunned by the situation, Senior Xie felt an extremely stifling sensation that threatened to blow his chest up. Even though he could not comprehend the profundity of the pierce, he could feel his flow of zhenqi and momentum being completely thrown off when the hair strand pierced toward him. Given his current movement, if he could not find a solution fast, he would crash right into the hair. Although it was just a strand of hair, with zhenqi infused into it, its sharpness was on par with any sword. It was definitely more than capable of piercing through his throat or even decapitating his head. Retreat. Knowing that he would only incur severe injuries if he pushed on ahead, he gritted his teeth and thrust his palm forward. Pa! A sonic boom sounded in the air, and Senior Xie made use of the reaction force from the palm thrust to retreat. Due to the abrupt reversal in his energy flow, Senior Xie lost control of the raging zhenqi in his body, and it rampaged throughout his body like a heavy hammer tossed around the area. His face swiftly reddened, and fresh blood began trickling down from the corners of his mouth. So far, they had traded 2 moves, but without even touching one another, he was already injured. Most likely, no one would believe him if he told them. What is going on? I have no idea either. What is Senior Xie up to? With their eye of discernment, they were unable to see through the prowess of Zhong Xian's sword art. All they saw was that Senior Xie had the upper hand when he abruptly retreated, resulting in a backlash in his energy flow. This bewildering situation left all of them dumbstruck. Could it be that our Senior Xie is actually a masochist? Now that you mention it, that could very well be the case. I remember that Senior Xie once pursued our Senior Shui before, but the very next day, his entire face was swollen. I heard about that, too. After that, he didn't dare take even a second glance at Senior Shui, right? Just that. What does that have to do with being masochist? It has everything to do with being masochist. Every single person in the academy knows that that person likes Senior Shui, and he still dared to court her. Isn't that just asking for a beating? The various juniors gossiped by the side. On the other hand, seeing the bizarre expressions that his juniors were shooting him by the side, Senior Xie could roughly guess what they were thinking of, and his face turned completely livid. He had planned to teach that arrogant fellow a lesson in his teacher's stead, but despite wielding a Saint Intermediate tier sword to deal with a fellow who was holding nothing but a strand of hair, he ended up inducing an energy backlash himself and spurted blood. If you can withstand this move, I'll admit defeat. Taking a step back, Senior Xie took a deep breath before his eyes abruptly narrowed dangerously. Huala! A powerful surge of sword intent immediately burst forth from it, rising straight up into the sky. It's Senior Xie's trump card, Sorrowless Sword. This is the sword art created by our teacher, right? A sword to sever all frustrations, distancing oneself from worry and sorrow. Within the same cultivation realm, there is none who can withstand this sword art. Our teacher is able to create 99 surges of sword chi instantaneously when executing this move. Of us, Senior Xie has shown the greatest aptitude toward this sword art, and even though he cannot compare to our teacher, he's already able to produce 32 surges of sword chi in a breath. With 32 surges of sword chi sealing his acupoints, the young man won't even be able to find the strength within him to counterattack. A commotion broke out in the surroundings, and worry surfaced in Shui Qianrou's eyes. She was the one who had brought Zhong Xian here, so she would feel deeply guilty if he was injured in the duel against her senior. But with his strength, this shouldn't pose a problem at all. However, recalling how the young man was able to clear even the Yi corridor, it was unlikely that Senior Xie would be a match for him. Tzzzzzz. Driving his aura to its very peak, Senior Xie rose into the sky, and entering the state of swordman union, he pushed his sword forth. Not bad. Zhong Xian nodded in approval. This sword art required the sword practitioner to devote their spirit, mind, and soul into their swordsmanship in order to heighten its prowess. Without exceptional aptitude toward swordsmanship, it would be difficult to achieve this feat with a single pierce. He was able to seal off 32 of the opponent's acupoints, thus placing the opponent in a disadvantageous position. A truly incredible technique it was. Eye of insight. In an instant, the various flaws in Senior Xie's movements appeared in clarity right before Zhongxian. The might is decent, but it has too many openings. With just a glance, Zhongxian could already see more than a dozen openings. Instead of stepping back, he chose one of the openings and charged forth. What is that fellow doing? Does he intend to clash directly with Senior Xie's sword with that strand of hair? I can't even bring myself to watch any longer. That's suicide. A huge uproar rippled through the crowd upon seeing Zhongxian's actions. In their view, the logical course of action to make before Senior Xie's ferocious offense was to evade. Yet, that young man actually dashed right up instead. He was really courting death. Even Jian Qinsheng could not help but feel deeply perplexed by the sight before him. He was the one who had created the sorrowless sword, and he knew very well what frightening offensive power it wielded. Even sword practitioners who wielded sword arts of the same tier would not dare clash with it directly, and yet, the young man actually wanted to face it with just a strand of hair. Not only was it likely that he would be injured in the encounter, there was even a chance that he might be killed in the clash. Voila! Before many bewildered gazes, the sword finally came into contact with the hair. Who? Just as everyone thought that the hair strand would be sliced into countless shreds by the rampaging sword Qi, the taut hair strand suddenly slackened, and it moved in an unexpected trajectory to strike the back of Senior Xie's sword. Wang! It was a resounding metallic clang, and following right after was a series of crisp sounds. Catcher! Catcher! Taken aback, everyone quickly took a closer look, and they saw cracks swiftly creeping across the sword. In just the blink of an eye, it had already shattered into countless fragments, scattering all over the ground. Pu. With his sword shattered, Senior Xie once again suffered a backlash of his zhenqi. His face reddened, and blood spurted from his mouth. With a jolt, his body collapsed to the ground. The sorrowless sword was indubitably a powerful sword art, but it required an extreme level of concentration into one's sword. The shattering of the sword would inevitably result in the abrupt severing of one's mind, spirit, and soul, dealing immense damage to the sword practitioner. The surroundings fell unnervingly silent. Everyone stared at the young man, aghast. Swallowing a pill, Senior Xie struggled to his feet as he muttered despondently beneath his breath, "I've lost." No matter how unwilling he was to accept it, he had no choice but to admit his defeat. For a sword practitioner like him to lose to a strand of hair while wielding a Saint intermediate tier sword. Everything was so unbelievable that it felt unreal to him, as if he was in the midst of a dream. "There's no need to feel discouraged by your loss," Jian Qinsheng told Senior Xie. After which, he turned his gaze to Zhongxian with a heated look in his eyes, as if he had found a gem. "This young brother over here has achieved a level of swordsmanship far above yours. I understand." Senior Xie nodded in embarrassment. Noting the slight air of awkwardness, Zhongxian quickly spoke up. "It's just a friendly duel to learn from one another. I'm also in awe of Senior Xie's extraordinary swordsmanship. To be able to use a strand of hair to shatter his sword, your grasp over the sword has really reached the apex of the continent." Jian Qinsheng did not hold back on his compliments at all. "If I didn't see wrongly, your strand of hair should also be severed too, right?" "That's right." Zhongxian nodded as he released his zhenqi. "Who?" With the slight tug of a light breeze, the taut hair immediately dissipated on the spot. The crowd was astonished once more. It wasn't too difficult to infuse one's zhenqi into an intact strand of hair to pull it taut, but the strand of hair that the young man wielded had already dissipated into countless fragments. To be able to circulate one's zhenqi through it to maintain its form and even shatter Senior Xie's sword, just how frightening was the young man's control over his zhenqi? After confirming his guess, Jian Qinsheng consoled his disciple with a smile. "Actually, you don't have to be too disheartened. Your sword wasn't shattered by the strand of hair in his hand." Hearing those words, a look of incomprehension surfaced on Senior Xie's face. The other disciples were equally confused as well. The shattering of the sword had only begun after the hair struck the sword. If it was not the hair that had caused the shattering of the sword, what else could it be? When you execute the sorrowless sword, due to your piercing action, you focus all your might at the tip of the sword, hoping to concentrate your strength to defeat your opponent. As a result of that, the blade of your sword was left completely unguarded. Furthermore, the spot that the hair strand struck was where the exertion of might intersected, thus causing the zhenqi you have infused into the sword to run amok. To put it in more direct terms, it's your own strength that caused the shattering of the sword. All your opponent did was find the ideal position and timing to strike. Jian Qinsheng explained earnestly, fearing that his disciple would lose all confidence in his swordsmanship as a result of this encounter. After which, he turned to Zhongxian and asked, "May I know if what I have said is true?" Elder Jian is indeed keen-eyed. Zhongxian nodded. Jian Qinsheng was right. No matter how he concentrated his zhenqi into the strand of hair he wielded, it was impossible for it to be able to shatter a Saint intermediate tier weapon. The reason he had been able to produce such an effect was because he had tapped into Senior Xie's strength as well. When the intersection of might within the sword was struck by his strand of hair, the gathered zhenqi ran amok, resulting in the swift destruction of the blade. Due to the backlash from the strike, the feeble strand of hair also ended up being reduced into countless shreds. If not for Zhongxian's pure zhenqi, it would have long disappeared along with the wind. To be able to see through flaws in the swordsmanship of another and launch a precise counterattack, if I'm not mistaken. With a hint of agitation and disbelief in his eyes, Jian Qinsheng stared at Zhongxian intently as he asked, "Has your comprehension of swordsmanship already achieved the level of sword quintessence?" Only those who had achieved the level of sword quintessence could possess such sensitivity to swordsmanship, clearly perceiving the movement of sword qi in the area to launch an effective counterattack, thus easily subduing Senior Xie even while he was executing the sorrowless sword. "That's right." Zhongxian nodded in response. He might still have been able to conceal it if he had not made a move, but if Jian Qinsheng could not tell this much after the previous display, the many years he had spent practicing swordsmanship really would have been in vain. To comprehend sword quintessence despite being only in your 20s. "Are you from the Zhong clan?" Even after hearing the affirmative response from Zhongxian, Jian Qinsheng still found it difficult to believe what he was hearing. Just how much aptitude must the young man possess in swordsmanship in order to climb this far at an age as young as his? One must know that he had also been reputed to be a peerless genius back in his time, but still, he had to devote many years of effort into his swordsmanship before he was able to achieve the level of sword quintessence. "Zhong clan? I'm not from the Zhong clan," Zhongxian replied with a bitter smile. Why would everyone assume that he was from the Zhong clan after hearing his name? Were the offspring of Zhong clan the only Zhongs who were talented? It was as if they were saying that it was impossible for normal cultivators to achieve this level through their own hard work. "You aren't from the Zhong clan?" Jian Qinsheng was taken aback for a moment before breaking into a heart laughter. "That's truly great, ha ha ha." Seeing how excited Jian Qinsheng had suddenly become, Zhongxian could not help but fall into a daze. To get so excited after hearing that he was not from the Zhong clan, could it be that Jian Qinsheng had some kind of grudge with the Zhong clan? Chapter 1326 Classifications of Quintessence 1. Pardon me, it seems like I have acted inappropriately. With a smile, Jian Qinsheng swiftly regained his composure as he looked at Zhongxian with a satisfied look. "The swordsmanship you executed previously is also the flowing water swordsmanship, right?" Hearing that name, Zhongxian was startled. He shook his head and replied, "Flowing water swordsmanship? What's that? You have never heard of it before?" Jian Qinsheng frowned. "The swordsmanship that you practice was created by my ancestor, the third sanctum head, Jian Liushui, and it has been passed down for many generations before coming down to me. It is also practiced by many other sword practitioners in the Sanctum of Sages. The swordsmanship that you executed earlier, be it in terms of sword intent or maneuvers, bears a close resemblance to it. It should be the flowing water swordsmanship. Even though the swordsmanship was created by his ancestor, it was not just passed down through his lineage. There were many students of the Sanctum of Sages Sword Sanctuary who practiced the flowing water swordsmanship as well. He thought that even if the young man before him was not from the Zhong clan, he must have grasped the crux to the flowing water swordsmanship through some kind of fortuitous encounter, allowing him to achieve such strength within a short period of time. Yet, to think that the young man had not even heard of the flowing water swordsmanship before. Realizing that Jian Qinsheng might be referring to that terribly flawed swordsmanship of his, Zhong Xian replied with a polite smile, "To tell you the truth, the sword art that I executed earlier was something that I came up with. Even though it's similar to your flowing water swordsmanship in form, they are two different sword arts. That nonsensical swordsmanship might have appeared fine at first glance, but upon further examination, the flaws that it was riddled with would leave one feeling disgusted all over. He would have to be mad to practice such swordsmanship. You came up with that sword art?" Jian Qinsheng widened his eyes in disbelief. On the other hand, Zhong Xian nodded in response. Considering that he was in the Sanctum of Sages, one of the top institutes in the master-teacher continent, he could not afford to use Yang Xian's name anymore. Otherwise, if the master-teacher pavilion headquarters looked into the matter and proved his statement false, he would be in deep trouble. Since that was the case, it would be safer for him to say that he was the one who had come up with it. In any case, after comprehending sword quintessence, he could already be considered a sword master. As such, it would not be unusual for him to have come up with a couple of sword arts or something. Jian Qinsheng was still unable to believe what he had just heard. "Can you display the sword art that you have created once more?" "Of course." Zhong Xian nodded in response. With a flick of his fingers, several cold glints shot forth from his fingertips, slicing right through the air. His movements were straightforward and to the point, devoid of any complexity. However, they carried an inescapable sharp edge, as if one would be unable to escape from him once the sword qi had laid its eyes on them. Another thing to note was that the sword art executed was extremely slow, but it carried a devastating momentum that left others feeling deeply helpless. It was as if standing against the sword art was equivalent to standing against the very heavens. "It really isn't the flowing water swordsmanship," Jian Qinsheng muttered in disappointment. He had thought that the young man before him had managed to grasp the crux of his ancestors' swordsmanship, but from the looks of it, the conceptualization of the two sword arts were vastly different. This was a clear sign that they were from two separate lineages. Furthermore, he could tell that the other party's sword art was even more profound than his ancestors' flowing water swordsmanship, containing innumerable transformations. Unfortunately, it was still severely lacking in terms of prowess. From the looks of it, it was likely to be a rather low-tier sword art, not exceeding Saint Intermediate tier. Tossing aside the feelings of disappointment within, Jian Qinsheng looked at the young man before him once more. "Since Zhong Shi was able to create such a formidable sword art, and your comprehension of swordsmanship has also achieved the level of sword quintessence, you probably aren't here to learn." Considering how accomplished the young man before him was in the field of swordsmanship, possibly achieving a level that was close to him, it was unlikely that the young man was there to learn from him. "I did come to visit with a humble request in mind. I heard that Elder Jian has a vast collection of sword art manuals, and if it's not too much to ask, I would like to browse through it." Zhong Xian revealed his true intentions. "You wish to browse through my collection of sword art manuals? That isn't a problem. Just that." At this point, Jian Qinsheng hesitated for a brief moment before continuing. "To tell you the truth, my compendium of sword arts was created by my ancestor, Jian Liushui, and he has infused his sword intent into it. Only those who have acquired the recognition of his sword intent will be able to enter its premises. In fact, I use that as a basis for deciding whom to accept as my disciples so as to ensure that they will be able to enter and study in the compendium of sword arts. Only those who have acquired the recognition of his sword intent will be able to enter its premises." Zhong Xian frowned. He had heard of this matter from Shui Chenro prior to heading over, and back then, he had thought that it was a rule that Jian Qinsheng had come up with. But from the looks of it now, that was not the case. "That's right. My ancestor reached the very pinnacle of the master-teacher continent in his time, and his strength far surpassing mine. The sword intent that he left behind is exceptionally powerful, such that even I am unable to flout his rules, Jian Qinsheng said with a bitter smile. Everyone said that he was too rigid and inflexible. He possessed an exceptional sword heritage, but he chose to selfishly keep it to himself, and that was what led to him being unable to find a suitable successor to his lineage of swordsmanship. Only he himself knew that he was restricted by the rules imposed by his ancestor, and there was nothing he could do about it. There are only two possible ways one can enter the compendium of sword arts. First, possessing the sanctum head token. Second, earning the acknowledgement of the sword intent. There are no other alternatives. If you really wish to access the book collection, feel free to give it a go. Once you have earned the acknowledgement of the sword intent, you will be able to freely enter and leave the compendium of sword arts. Zhong Xian pondered for a moment before nodding. All right. While he possessed the sanctum head token, he still was not entitled to the privileges that it came with. His cultivation realm was only at leaving aperture realm primary stage, and his master teacher rank was at 7-star. He was a long way off being able to unseal the token. Putting aside the fact that Sage Kuei had warned him against revealing the sanctum head token to anyone before he managed to successfully unseal it, it could lead to a great deal of trouble if he did so. This simply was not aligned with his motto of humility and keeping a low profile. Since that was the case, it would be good for him to see if he could receive the acknowledgement of the sword intent first. Perhaps, he might just be able to clear it easily with the unique nature of the Heaven's Path sword art. Follow me. Jian Qinsheng nodded before beckoning Zhong Xian over. Considering how talented the young man before him was and, most importantly of all, he was not from the Zhong clan, Jian Qinsheng was more than willing to grant him access to his collection of books. However, it was a pity that he was helpless before the rules. Zhong Xian followed closely behind Jian Qinsheng, and Shui Qianro, Senior Xie, and the others glanced at one another before deciding to tag along. The fact that they were all present meant that they had earned the acknowledgement of the sword intent. They were curious to see if this young sword master would be able to do the same. It did not take long for them to arrive at a rather spacious room. Inscribed at the very center of the room was a wall with a massive, sword, character. Its strokes were sharp and powerful, carrying a disposition that felt as if it would pierce through the heavens. It was somewhat similar to the character that he had seen back at the Sword Lagoon, but the both of them were completely different in terms of conceptualization. Carved beneath the character were all kinds of explanations and interpretations. With just a glance, it was apparent that there was some history to those carvings. Most likely, they were the insights and experiences left behind by generations of sword practitioners in the lineage. This character was left behind by ancestor Liu Shui many years ago, Jian Qinsheng explained. As long as one can step within 5 meters of it without coming under its attack, one will have earned the sword intent's acknowledgement. I see. Zhong Xian nodded. Once a sword practitioner had tempered their sword intent to a profound level, the sword intent could gain a certain level of consciousness, allowing it to assess a situation instinctively and move of its own accord to protect its owner. The character inscribed on the wall harnessed Jian Liushui's very will, and it would be a grave mistake to underestimate the prowess of the sword intent harnessed within it. If it sensed a conceptualization of swordsmanship that was at odds with it, it would automatically launch a series of attacks. Allow me to give it a try. Knowing what it would take for him to access the collection of books, Zhong Xian took in a deep breath and began walking forward slowly. However, barely after taking a single step, he was already feeling immensely pressured by the massive character before him. It felt as if he was a mortal standing before a stupendously massive sun, and every step forward resulted in a swift intensifying of the searing sensation on his primordial spirit. Is the swordsmanship I have cultivated really incompatible with the sword intent? Zhong Xian had been hoping that the odds would be in his favor, but given the current circumstances, it was clear that he was not going to receive the acknowledgement of the sword intent. This was really troublesome. He could attempt to sneak into the compendium of sword arts to read the books, but considering that he was in the sanctum of sages, perhaps that might not be a good decision. Ignoring the tight defenses around the compendium of sword arts, if it was revealed that he, the future sanctum head, had broken into his own academy like a thief, he would become the laughingstock of the town. Geez, with great power comes great responsibility, It seemed like becoming the sanctum head was not necessarily a blessing. He really missed those days when he was a nobody and could do whatever he wanted freely without being restrained by anything. While Zhongxian was thinking such thoughts, his feet did not stop. He continued advancing forward, and the pressure from the character continued heaping down on him. It was as if he was standing right beneath a guillotine, and the blade was about to fall upon his neck at any moment. Feeling threatened by the might of the sword intent harnessed within the character, the sword intent within Zhongxian's body also began stirring in unease, eager to charge out to stand its ground against the other. Will he be able to obtain the acknowledgement of the sword intent? Shui Qianro asked worriedly as she watched the young man advancing toward the character. Jian Qinsheng shook his head. I'm afraid that things don't look too good for him. Through his observation, he could tell that the young man had already found his own path in swordsmanship, and it was of a vastly different conceptualization to his ancestors' flowing water swordsmanship. It was not possible for the young man to successfully obtain the sword intent's acknowledgement. Woo woo woo. While Jian Qinsheng was in the midst of his words, the character on the wall abruptly jolted, and a surge of sword qi shot straight for Zhongxian. Ha! Knowing that this was a sign of failure, Jian Qinsheng sighed deeply as he waved his hand forward. A powerful might burst forth from his finger, deflecting the sword qi emanated from the character. Come back. All right. Knowing that the result was already clear, Zhongxian could only shake his head in disappointment before retreating. It seems like you aren't able to win the acknowledgement of the sword intent. Perhaps, this is a sign to say that you aren't meant to enter the compendium of sword arts, Jian Qinsheng said in lamentation. Hearing those words, Zhongxian could only sigh deeply again. Considering that the Heaven's Path sword art harnessed the very essence of swordsmanship, he had been hoping that it might just be able to earn the acknowledgement of the flowing water swordsmanship. However, it seemed like his thoughts were too naive. May I know if there's any way for me to obtain the acknowledgement of the sword intent? There's only one true peak to swordsmanship, but there are many different sword quintessences that pave the way to the top. The sword quintessence comprehended by my ancestor is one such way, and the one comprehended by the head of the Zhong clan is another. Even though they lead to the same peak, different sword quintessences still repel one another due to their fundamental differences. Thus, I fear that it's impossible for you to succeed in your current state. That being said, perhaps, just perhaps, if you could comprehend the flowing water swordsmanship to the level of sword quintessence, you might just be able to earn the acknowledgement of the sword intent, Jian Qinsheng said. If the comprehending of true swordsmanship was the destination that all sword practitioners hope to reach, sword quintessences could be considered the pathway that sword practitioners tread upon on their way there. Naturally, even if there was only one destination, there were innumerable pathways that could lead one there. This was just like how a question could be resolved in many different manners, but the answer would still be the same. What you mean is that, as long as I comprehend the sword intent harnessed in the sword character on the wall and achieve the level of sword quintessence, I might be able to obtain the sword intent's acknowledgement. Zhongxian asked. That's right. Jian Qinsheng nodded. However, don't even think about trying that. It's only a possibility I am proposing theoretically. Achieving one sword quintessence already requires a sword practitioner to devote their entire life to it. Achieving a second one, that would be practically impossible. There have been countless swordsmanship geniuses in the Sanctum of Sages, but none of them have ever succeeded in that before. It will only be a waste of effort. Is it really that difficult? Zhongxian wondered doubtfully as he turned his gaze toward the words beneath the sword character and closed his eyes. Indeed. The difficulty is so great that it's almost unimaginable. From what I read in the records, my ancestor, Jian Liushui, attempted to comprehend another sword quintessence after completing the flowing water swordsmanship, only to fail terribly, nearly causing his cultivation to go berserk. With a deep sigh, Jian Qinsheng turned his gaze to the young man to usher him out with an apology when a loud buzzing sound suddenly echoed. A surge of sword intent burst forth from the young man's glabella. Seemingly sensing something, the sword character ahead suddenly began trembling excitedly, and even the room itself began creaking loudly. Jian Qinsheng's eyes widened in astonishment. Is that The sword quintessence of the flowing water swordsmanship. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.